and welcome to 1 Week, 1 Year, podcast where we watch and discuss every year of film history in order, starting in 1895, the dawn of cinema, and this episode is 1942. I'm one of your hosts, Chris Ellie. I'm a film projectionist, and joining me as always is...
I'm Glenn Covell. I'm a filmmaker.
He makes movies. Just uploaded to YouTube. Picnic Panic. Go
That's
watch
true.
it.
I made it public, so
Okay,
it's done its festival run. So I figured, you know what, let the world see it.
The world needs to see Picnic Panic. I just saw it pop up in my subscriptions box today.
Oh, nice.
I said, "Oh, Glenn has released his silent opus. Is it your
My
opus?
4-minute silent opus.
Would you call it your opus?"
I would not call it my opus. No, it's not quite opus, maybe, but you know,
if it was a bunch of moving around shapes on the screen, then you might call it your opus.
True.
That's a check back on one of the early 20s episode for that reference. Well, yeah, you know, we're a podcast, old movies and stuff. Subscribe if you want. I don't know. I usually say that at the end, but you can hear it before 3 hours from now.
You can do it at any time. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, our little calls to action.
Sure.
I'm calling you to action, Glenn. My action is how are you doing? Tell me how you're doing.
I'm doing okay, I suppose, as well as to be expected.
Mm-hmm.
I went to a very fancy like showbiz awards thing this week, so that was fun.
What was your outfit? Did you get a picture of your outfit?
I didn't really get a good picture of my outfit, which I realize is maybe a mistake because there was a step and repeat there. But I think I was dressed very, very nicely. I was complimented on my outfit, so that is good.
Oh, by Steven Spielberg?
No, he wasn't there. Not this year.
Who was there? Name names. Drop names.
Name names. Boy, Robert Eggers was there. Ariana Grande was there.
The Grande.
Robert Pattinson was there. Michelle Yeoh was there. It was a whole bunch of... Ray Fiennes was there. Isabella Rossellini was there.
Wow. Thank you to the production code for and all of the evils that came with it for bringing that. Isn't your organization kind of the National Board of
my
Review?
organization?
They're like the descendant of the Hays Code.
I think it did start in some capacity as... I don't think it was associated with the Hays Code, but it was a like similar kind of organization to that. I think it basically has absolutely no bearing on what it does now, which is just a bunch of New Yorkers who like to watch movies. Which, you know, I in that capacity, I'm like, great, glad to be a part of it.
Who would have thought that a bunch of New Yorkers who like to watch movies would have started with some Catholics who wanted no Tommy guns in movies? And who would have thought that comedians in cars getting coffee would have started with a little show called Seinfeld? I don't know. Those things associated in my mind, but maybe it wasn't that much of a connection. Anyway, I'm here in DC getting established over here, and I just ran a 35 print of The Adventures of Prince Ahmed with a live score by the Anvil Orchestra, which was
very, very
super fun. I'm about to go see The Brutalist on 70 this weekend.
Oh,
so
let me know what you think.
Have you seen it?
I have, yeah. Not on 70mm, unfortunately. I may have to go back and see it again.
Yeah, it's a lot of millimeters. It's twice as many.
Yeah,
but yeah, just doing film stuff. I'm trying to see what museums are possible to visit in my spare time here that just aren't the one that I work at.
What museums are possible?
I made it's one of the most me things that I could do, but I sat down for like 3 hours and made a Google Doc of every temporary exhibit at every museum in the city, ordered by date that they close, so that I can knock out all of the museums that I'd like to see in order of being able to see every possible thing that I can. And then I've got them
Mm.
like plotted out by days that they're open and hours that they're doing this. And it's nuts. Haven't actually put it into practice yet, but that's been my life.
You've done the hard part already. Now it seems like you get to just do the fun part and go to a bunch of museums
You know,
in order of importance.
maybe if I'm really being honest with myself, the fun part is making lists, and the hard part is actually doing things.
See, I feel the opposite.
I love to do things, don't get me wrong, but it is so much harder to do things than it is to make lists about doing things, at least in my experience.
Yeah, fair. Yeah, you have a
I
point there.
whenever I'm in a situation where I ought to be doing something, I tend to make a list instead. Anyway,
I mean, hey, at least that's doing something. I feel like whenever I'm in a situation of wanting to do something, I just do nothing, and so
and it puts me in the same league as old Saint Nick, so
there you
I
go.
would share the space with him. The
How
list
often do you
making
check the
space.
list, though?
I've checked it maybe 3 or 4 times so
Oh,
far.
so you're way ahead of old Saint Nick, then. You got him beat.
Famous list havers are probably what? Santa, Nixon, and Schindler. If I'm
Famous list havers. Yeah, I think those are the big three.
this is a podcast about movies, but
If
it
you couldn't
is.
tell.
But it's also a podcast about movie history. And you know what else happened in history? World War II. Let's hear about it from Glenn in the news of the year.
Oh boy, as word of warning to everyone listening, this episode is an "Oops, all bummers" news segment. So here we go.
The news of the year, 1942. The United States, United Kingdom, Soviet Union, China, and 22 other governments signed the Declaration by United Nations, agreeing to fight as allies against the Axis powers. President Roosevelt signs Executive Order 9066, leading to the mass incarceration of Japanese Americans. Nazi Germany systematically murders over 2 million Jewish citizens across Europe, the fastest rate of genocide in history. The Imperial Japanese Army forces thousands of POWs in the Philippines to march 65 miles. Many do not survive. Reinhard Heydrich, a primary architect of the Holocaust, is successfully killed by Czech operatives in Prague. U.S. Marines land on the island of Guadalcanal, the first American offensive of the war. Glenn Miller and his orchestra are awarded the first ever gold record for selling 1 million copies of Chattanooga Choo Choo. The Nazis attack, but fail to capture the Soviet city of Stalingrad. Over 1 million are killed in the fighting, the most of any battle in human history. The first self-sustaining nuclear reaction takes place in a secret lab under the University of Chicago as part of the mysterious Manhattan Project.
And that is the news of 1942, which is arguably one of, if not the worst year of human history. So, fun. Anyway, they also made some movies that year.
Yeah, isn't that fun?
Not to completely kill the mood for this entire, supposedly lighthearted film history podcast that we're doing. But
we never claimed to be lighthearted.
Not this one. I mean, the rest of the episode hopefully would be a little more light.
Let's lighten our hearts with the Battle of Midway. In our 1 week, 1 reel.
Yeah, doing, I guess, just one short this episode. Yeah.
I guess so, because I did not watch the Frank Capra one, and
arguably not that short. So,
and also, yeah, it's almost an hour. But the Battle of Midway is a very good short documentary from our buddy John Ford, who happened to be on site at the beginning of this battle.
Yeah, well, he was one of a few Hollywood directors who got recruited to work for the Army and Navy and U.S. Armed Forces to make propaganda movies and other such sort of recruitment and training films and things. But I feel like John Ford, being the guy that he was just I'm just gonna make a documentary. I'm not gonna this is ostensibly a propaganda movie, but it is mostly just footage of a battle happening that he is in the middle of while he's shooting, and it's kind of bananas to see.
It is. I was shocked watching this movie at like the viscerality of the real life like violence that was there.
There's
You're not seeing anything gruesome, but like it's harrowing. Like there's explosions and attacks and planes diving by and fire. It's it's a lot.
But it's like he's physically so close to the explosions filming them that like the shockwave, I think, or maybe just like the rough handling of the camera is like knocking the film out of alignment in the camera,
which is like such a crazy effect. I thought it was a mistake at the beginning, and then I realized it was only happening during the explosions.
Wait, I mean, it is a mistake. Like that's not supposed to happen. That's just like the camera is like ceasing to function because it's like being rattled by so much force.
Right. I was saying I was thinking that it was like a mistake in the scanning of the film, but like it probably is not. It probably was. That's crazy. This movie also is in color. It looks
that is huge.
It looks great.
Like that's like really makes it really stand out from like a lot of. I guess there are those like Netflix documentaries that are like, we compiled all the color footage from World War II in this 28 season docuseries. But it's pretty nuts to see like color 60mm footage of World War II. Like it makes it feel much more immediate than I'm used to seeing.
Totally.
Footage.
Totally. Yeah. Like some thoughts that came through while I was watching this were thinking about like the recency of it, right? I think that as I was a kid, World War II felt recent and urgent in a way, because when I was a little kid, a lot of people who fought in World War II were still alive. Mm-hmm. Now, that is not the case. There are relatively few people who fought in World War II who are still alive. So in a way, I feel like, maybe this is just my perception, but in a way it feels like it's drifted into history just slightly. I'm used to looking at this stuff in the context of like we started in the 1890s, we started in the Victorian era, and now we're here, right? And then I'm seeing these like, yes, that's a B-17 super fortress. It's a giant metal object that I can go to a museum and look at it and go like, whoa, that's a whole thing that was made recently. And yes, like you were saying, seeing it in color really gives it this like present, immediate feeling that you are just like not used to with a lot of World War II footage.
Yeah, just like seeing like people's sunburns, all of a sudden you're just like, oh damn, these are like real people that lived and died and were like a part of this thing. Yeah, like the red of the fire mixing with the smoke is just like it really adds a lot. Well, I mean, unsurprisingly, I feel like it's kind of maybe a little silly to be like, oh, it's in color, it looks more real, but like yeah, I mean, I think also the fact that this is like so clearly just being filmed by someone who's like standing in the middle of this stuff, that it's like not being shot from far away, that it's like John Ford was just like on a platform filming this stuff, like as planes were dive bombing around him and things.
Well, that's the thing, right? It's like, I've seen movie footage like this, but it does not compare, honestly, to the reality of what is happening in this footage. It like stuff that is constructed doesn't feel like this, where I think that like, because this is so like verite, it is so like in it's like the person holding this camera could just explode any second, right? Like, that like while you're watching this, the people filming it were like literally in a battle, literally like they could have died any second, just like any of the soldiers around them. And like that, it really adds so much to the footage. I was really struck by this. I was also thinking about how I'm not the most patriotic person around, but like when I was like seeing like a lot of the stuff of the boys fighting for the good fight, I was like, yeah, like look, it's an actual uncomplicated fight that is not as ambiguous as every other war that the United States has been in.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, in that sense, good good old World War II propaganda. Like it's doing its job well. But it's like it doesn't feel purely propagandistic. It does feel like a genuine, just like a document of a thing that happened.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the only thing that feels propagandistic about it is that it is like probably focusing on like the terror and the valor, and they probably caught a lot of footage of like suffering and death and
Oh
dismemberment
yeah,
that
sure,
they did not put in the movie.
right. I'm still kind of surprised that this is like a recruitment tool, right? This is to be like, hey kids, like go join the fight in the
Yeah,
Pacific. It's like this does not look fun. This looks terrifying, and
yeah,
like so I appreciate the level to which John Ford at least is. I'm sure he is sugarcoating it somewhat. Like I'm sure like the raw film reels probably have some nastier stuff on them, but like
yeah. They're like
it's
picking guys out of the ocean who had been floating without food and water for 13 days, and they're just like looking okay. They're just like smiling and walking around. It's like I don't know about that.
yeah, I don't know, who knows, maybe that was staged. Who's to say? Not me. But yeah, I think apparently John Ford had to like smuggle some of this footage like back to the States. I forget why. There's a Netflix documentary about him and Frank Capra and William Wyler and the other directors who went off to make World War II films that talks about that a little bit. So go watch that if you want to know more. But yeah, it's John Ford, good at his job. Who knew?
Yeah. One small note about this is that that as fighter pilots do, they like put down like a notch or like a little painted thing on their plane for every other one
Hmm.
that they shot down, and they've got like Japanese flags on the plane, noting how many Japanese planes that they shot down, and the announcer goes 7 meatballs on his plane.
Oh my god, I missed that.
Which is like so funny.
It's one of those things where I'm like, I'm sure that's intended in a very derogatory manner, but it's so silly that it also is like hard to, I don't know, take it that seriously, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, maybe there's
It
some
would be
derogatory
it would be
thing to it, but
very
like,
funny if they were Italian planes. I'll say that
right.
much. Even
That
though
would be
that wouldn't match up with the flag as well, but
right. Yeah, right. No, if they were shooting down Italian planes and they put meatballs on their like actual meatballs on, on their
with the little pepperonis.
um yeah good short.
Yeah, yeah.
But since that's our only one, I guess it's time to go on to our feature presentation.
And now we're pleased to bring you our feature presentation.
I kind of feel like we should start with Magnificent Ambersons.
Okay.
Because that's when I watched the furthest amount of time ago. So I don't remember it as well as the others.
Okay.
And I also took the least amount of notes. So I feel like I want to get that one out.
Sure.
While it's still if I wait 30 more minutes, it's not gonna be as fresh.
I watched it this morning, so
It's like a great. Then you coming at it from both ends. I feel like it's also like, last episode was our big Citizen Kane talk, and this is like, man, what's Orson Welles gonna do next? He's gonna make another movie. What's this gonna be? And it's like, is not the revered classic that Citizen Kane is.
yeah,
for various reasons.
it's a good movie. I think.
I think so too.
I can see why it is not held in the same, in the same league as Citizen Kane.
Yeah.
But this is a novel adaptation, and once again, it feels like it. But it probably doesn't feel like it as much as it otherwise would have, because this movie was supposed to be a lot longer than it ended up being. It's a relatively brisk for a movie like this, hour and a half, where I think it was like closer to 2.5 or 3 hours originally.
I don't know if it was up to 3. I think they cut about 45 minutes to an hour
Okay, yeah.
out of it. And when I say they, I mean
RKO.
The big wigs at RKO, sort of behind Orson Welles' back while he was out of the country shooting a different movie, gave it to an editor and were like, hey, cut an hour out of this, and also we're going to shoot a completely new ending that is much more positive and upbeat than the ending that Orson Welles wanted for it. And so Orson Welles kind of disowned this movie and was like, they ruined it. I still think it's quite good. And I do wonder because like the missing footage is just gone. Like no one has ever been able to find it. It was probably destroyed.
I mean, this editor, I think, did a relatively good job, I suppose, because unlike, I think a comparison with this maybe feels like an Erich von Stroheim movie, and unlike an Erich von Stroheim movie, it doesn't feel like there's anything like conspicuously missing from this.
It doesn't make a huge leap to like, it's like, wow, there's clearly something missing there. Yeah, I mean, I also think, there's this sort of thing where it's like, oh man, the lost version of this movie, what could it have been? I think even maybe those extra 45 to 50 minutes like really made the movie and like really put it over the top. I think this was always a little bit kind of gonna suffer in relation to Citizen Kane, like in comparison to
sophomore slump.
Yeah, I feel like just the kind of the narrative of this movie doesn't feel quite as impactful as Citizen Kane does.
It's a little less important, I guess. It's a little less like this movie has things on its mind, but I think that it is maybe a little less like politically like vigorous as Citizen Kane, and it's not trying to do all the formal wackiness of Citizen Kane. Though there were some slight overlaps that I noticed, such as especially in the beginning, this sort of like testimonial style storytelling, like talking about the Ambersons and as viewed through all of the townspeople who kind of hate them. And then it's also not very fond of rich people, which it's funny. It's like when I went through this arc. Like I was like, Magnificent Ambersons, don't know anything about it, gonna watch this movie, and then I realized that like the Ambersons are like a super wealthy family, and I'm like, oh, that's very different from what's going on in Citizen Kane. That's a 180. To call them magnificent, and then I realized that like everyone hates them, and it's the story is all about this kid who absolutely sucks, and like. And I was like, all right, maybe this is kind of an ironic title then.
Yeah. It does feel like it has a lot of kind of thematic crossover with Citizen Kane about like wealth and America and like, what that does to people and sort of like the psychology of these like wealthy, powerful, like dynastic American families. It does feel like the Ambersons are sort of a bit of a sort of composite of a lot of different, probably real life families, but it's mostly about like their decline, their sort of like old ways that are sort of losing importance in like a more modern age. Like there's definitely this sort of like they have all their like old-fashioned ways about them, and they're kind of being supplanted by these like newer money people that are like coming up through like technology and building automobiles, and they're like, what? Automobiles will never be a thing.
Thankfully, unlike other period movies, when this one goes like, what, automobiles aren't going to be a thing, it doesn't rub me the wrong way like they like in every other movie that does that.
Well, because I think it isn't treated as much just like a kind of an offhand joke. It's like a pretty kind of integral to the plot of the movie is the fact that like these people like can't see the future coming at them, kind of.
You talk about like these like declining dynastic American rich families, and it makes me think of Gone with the Wind, right? And how this is like the other side of that coin,
Mm,
maybe, of like this movie has an ambivalence toward progress, but it doesn't, just because it has some negative things to say about like the automobile and the world that it ushers in, doesn't mean that it has any kind of like love for the bad things about the way things used to be.
right, yeah. It doesn't feel yeah, I don't feel like this movie really ever felt that nostalgic. Like there's
Hmm.
scenes in it that are sort of like, "Ah, yeah, olden times when we, had horses and buggies and like played in the snow."
Yeah.
But it definitely doesn't feel kind of wistful the way that something like Gone with the Wind does. It is much more kind of like, yeah, it does feel a little, it doesn't feel that, I guess, like it's taking a hard stance, sort of like olden times were worse. And it also doesn't necessarily feel like it's that sort of like forward looking either, because it is sort of like, yeah, automobiles are coming, but it's like, look at all of the things that the automobile kind of destroyed by its existence, and also just like they're super dangerous, they kill people all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's like an Oppenheimer moment in this, which honestly I respect, because like I feel the same way about cars. It's like this
Cars are
Oppenheimer
scary.
this Oppenheimer moment of the Joseph Cotton character, like who is I don't know, not the sole inventor, but like the kind of inventor
Yeah.
of cars in this, as a function in this story. And he's like, yeah, I don't know if I did the right thing or not, but it's kind of happening now, so I can't really do
Mm.
anything about it. Am I
What have I
becoming
done?
death? Maybe.
Yeah.
So our main character is George, who is this kind of like real, just like piece of shit.
Yeah,
um,
very
uh,
incredibly spoiled, entitled rich kid.
the movie begins with him as like one of those rich children who has like the curly locks, and like the sailor hat, and he's just
Which makes you wonder, almost sort of like, was that as much of a like cartoon cliche, or is it simply the fact that like Simpsons writers love old movies and they're just like, put the kid from Ambersons in it?
it
Like
definitely, yeah.
I do kind of wonder, like I feel like this movie is probably already playing with some, pre-existing iconography, right? But it does kind of feel like one of those things where it's like, the reason why that image is we recognize is because of all the ways that people have copied this movie.
Sometimes I wonder how different our perception of culture, of classic culture, would be if we hadn't seen The Simpsons. It really like
Yeah,
puts a
it accounts
filter
for a
on
lot.
everything that we are watching.
Like, oh,
um,
the thing from The Simpsons.
yeah. But anyway,
That does happen a lot. I feel like watching old movies, I am just like, oh yeah, that's the thing from The Simpsons.
we're in the money.
They love 1933, those Simpsons writers.
But like, you talk about like the decline of these families, and like, it's this family tree that has a lot of people in this previous generation, right? And there's aunts and uncles, and various people who are all in this kind of like upper crust society of the late 1800s. And um and then there's like an old woman at the beginning who's like basically predicting their downfall. And then the narrator, Orson Welles, goes like, the only things she got wrong is that they only had one son, right? And so it's like this huge tree that's like coming down into this one person, uh and it almost feels like it's like a withering of their family into
Mm.
like metaphorically, as like yes, he's like this spoiled kid, but he is like he's a spoiled rich kid, but he is also the result of like the crumbling of all of this like rich
Mm.
infrastructure.
There's also, right, during that sort of early section, everyone is, being terrorized by this little hellion child. And they're all like, one day you're gonna get your comeuppance. And so that's sort of like planting a seed.
Cue the rest of the movie.
Right. Planting a seed that you're like, all right, I guess the rest of this movie is about, we're going to see how he gets his comeuppance. And then, I mean, a bunch of stuff happens.
Right.
But it's like through all of that stuff, we start to get at least me as an audience member, start to get very engaged and sort of like, I want to see what happens with this story, with these people.
Yeah, I feel like
we're seeing like members of George's family are dying, and it's sort of like we're seeing this sort of slow crumbling of the family and sort of and his life, and then it reaches the point where he has sort of lost pretty much everyone in his life that he cares about or that cares about him. Like all of his relationships have been kind of burnt around him, and he's sort of sitting in the dark alone, having like either lost or pushed away everyone that he knows.
Yeah.
And the Orson Welles narrator comes back in. It's like, finally, he's got his comeuppance, but there was no one around to even enjoy it anymore. Like everyone who was even like waiting to see this guy's downfall is dead. Like that's how little he matters at this point.
It's a bleak movie. It's weird that
I'm like, oh, what a way to end a movie. And then there's like 20 minutes left, and I'm like, no, RKO.
You think all that stuff afterward was RKO?
I think at least most of it was. I think had the movie ended there, I would have been like, God damn, what a movie this is. And I think the extra stuff after that, I'm like, it's all right.
That's interesting. I guess I never really noticed like
just because that scene left me with such a feeling. I was like, oh, holy shit! Like,
yeah,
damn, I felt that.
It's almost like Scarlett O'Hara's low moment, right? But instead of like going like, by God, whatever she says, it's such a classic line. I don't remember what she says, but it's like, going like by God, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna build myself back up.
I'm never gonna go hungry again, I think is what she says.
And as God is my, does she say, is that as God is my witness?
Something like that.
Yeah.
Attack us in the comments.
Yeah, he just falls apart and everything. I mean, at least I think the next 20 minutes is just things continuing to like suck for him. Which
right, it's the last like minute that is like really feels out of place. I think.
But yeah, I mean, for a movie that's so negative, and like it's for a movie that is about like a main character so detestable, I was surprised at how, I don't know, in a way it feels a little breezy, it feels like
it's kind of fun. It's kind of a romp. Yeah.
Like there's
like it is pretty breezy and fun, I thought. Yeah.
There's fun stuff that happens in the movie. There's funny stuff that happens in the movie. And like, I think even a movie where you're just taking glee in watching this detestable main character suffer, like that is a kind of movie that is like, can be good, but like this is not even that necessarily. Like he never the movie never really has much sympathy for him, but also it's not like, I think it would not feel as watchable if it were just piling on him the entire movie. Like look at look at how he suffers, let's all enjoy his suffering. Not that he doesn't necessarily deserve it or whatever, but like, it's an interesting choice, I guess.
It's right, it's surprisingly fun for kind of how, I guess, dark or sort of negative the sort of basic narrative of it is. Because also like a lot of it is just kind of like rich people doing rich people stuff, and kind of either learning a lesson from it or more often not learning a lesson from it. Yeah, also just like as per Orson Welles, it's like it's very, very technically accomplished. It looks great. It's got some like really incredible imagery in it. I think in particular there's like a shot of George looking out a window, and it's like the shot is looking out the window, but we see his face in the reflection, like sort of large, like sort of reflected over like people leaving the house, and it's like, dang.
You saw this on film, right?
I did, yeah. I got to see this in a theater on film, which is a nice rarity.
I think black and white Academy ratio 35 prints look great. Because it's using all of the light from the projector rather than
right.
for a flat movie where it's using only some of the light. And I find them to really shine in a theater when you're watching something that's for Academy ratio.
Yeah.
And black and white footage, I think, looks great on Blu-ray, and it looks great on film as well.
Yeah. I saw it at the Roxy Hotel Theater in New York, which is like in the basement of a Art Deco hotel. So it's like it felt like a very period appropriate place to see the movie. Also, the fact that it was on film, I may have gotten dressed up a little bit to try to get the full effect. You know, I really wanted to see this as much in context as I possibly could.
This is like the Gentle Minions for you.
Yeah, I was really going method with my viewing of this movie.
A method watcher. This movie had Orson Welles narrating it at like very sporadic points, but the end of the movie is like him narrating. It's like, this is the end. The movie was shot by this guy, and sound and like sets decorated by this guy, and like he was reading out the credits, which, you know, maybe is in some way like a callback to his radio stuff. He originally adapted this for the radio, but it also felt like a really
George in the radio version.
But like it also just felt like a really I don't know, like a really respectful way of like tipping your hat to your crew.
I do really like how much he had his like Mercury, he had like the Mercury Theater, which is like his stage production, and then he had the Mercury Theater on the air, which was the radio stuff, and then when he went to film, he was like, this is a Mercury production. Like he was still like, the brand was still there, but it was like the same kind of like crew of actors that he brought with him.
Yeah.
That I think is just very cool that he was like, no, we're all a team. We're all in, you know, this is like our thing.
There's a great clip of Orson Welles that goes around sometimes of someone asking him in an interview, probably in the 70s or something like that, whether he ever feels like he cast the wrong actor for the job, and he was like, oh, I do it all the time, or like whether he would cast like a friend instead of an actor, or like the right actor for the job. He's like, oh, I do that all the time. Like it was like he was like, being good to your friends is more important than being a great artist, quote unquote. Which is like, that's awesome. That's so cool.
That is, I mean, like I have a lot of respect for that. It is funny how that is. I think he might be the only like big name director I've ever heard say something like that. I feel like most people, I have so often seen the opposite said, and like emphatically being like, do not cast your friends and things, like find the best possible actor you can.
Yeah.
Which I by and large do agree with. I think that is more in response to people who cast their friends who aren't actors and things. As opposed to like, if you're friends with a good actor, cast them in things. Like, why wouldn't you?
Right.
But yeah, I really like that end credits thing. It does feel very kind of respectful towards his cast and crew. And I just also feel like the novelty of it is really cool too. The fact that it's like narrated credits, and it's like each person gets kind of their own little kind of spotlight a little bit.
Yeah. And then it ends with like, and I'm your narrator. My name is Orson Welles. I also directed and wrote the picture.
Yeah. He never shows his own face though. It does kind of feel like he's like, I was all over that last one. I'm just going to narrate this one.
Yeah. Fair enough. There was like a part in the movie where it was talking about how like when you're in your early 20s, like you're a dum-dum, you don't know what you don't know, and then like it's only when you're in your 40s when you realize what a dum-dum you were in your early 20s. And it's like, this is a movie being made by a guy that's like maybe like 26, 25 at this point.
Yeah. I definitely see a lot of I don't know if we talked about this in the Citizen Kane episode. I feel like watching Ambersons though, I was really struck by how much I think I see like Spielberg's kind of visual style in these like early Orson Welles things, like particularly like
interesting.
The deep focus, I think, has definitely been something that's been like pointed out by a lot of other people that like Spielberg likes deep focus. But yeah, and just like the way the camera moves, the sort of the feeling where it's using the full frame, and it's using as many tools as possible, and it just feels very, I don't know, robust. I can't think of a better really word to describe it than that. But
yeah,
I could definitely see how. I mean, I think Orson Welles is one of the guys that Spielberg cites as like, along with John Ford and a bunch of other people, as like one of the guys that he like kind of learned from early on watching stuff.
And Orson Welles learned from John Ford, I guess.
Yeah. John Ford was like, everybody was just like, oh yeah, this guy's great. Also of note, unless do we have anything else to say about Magnificent Ambersons?
I don't, but I've got a segue. Unless you've got another, unless you've got a segue also.
Well, see, I do have a segue. I wonder if they're the same segue or different segues.
Well, you said also of note, so I don't know if.
Also of note about Magnificent Ambersons is the sets.
Oh,
which are very elaborate and very nice. Yeah. And I guess they were so good that in addition to the fact that there was a war on and there was a sort of surplus of set building materials, they were reused in multiple other films, including another 1942 film, Cat People.
Cat People.
Yeah. You had never seen this before, right?
No. Yeah.
I saw this in college, and it was one of a bunch of movies I saw in college with like next to no context for. Like, it was just sort of like, this is what we're watching in class today, and I hadn't heard of it. I think I might have like heard of it like in passing, but I didn't really know anything about it. And I was very impressed with it seeing it in college. I think I was slightly less impressed with it upon rewatch, just because it's sort of like, I've seen it before. It didn't quite have the same level of like, oh my God, what is this thing?
Right.
But still, I think this is a very cool movie, even if it isn't perfect.
Yeah. This is a movie about I mean, there's a lot of parallels between this and The Wolfman, which we watched for the last episode.
And it is like, boy, howdy, is this a better movie than The Wolfman?
Definitely, yeah. It's. I mean, in a way, it's coming from like, you know, it is the feminine answer to the masculine Wolfman,
right? Yeah,
which is quite interesting, and I think it's also, its horror is much more effective. Like, the Wolfman is not scary at all, and it's just campy fun, and this like actually has some like really well constructed like scenes of tension.
This has genuine scares, I think, in it. I think there are, I think the pool scene in particular, which is like very famous, I think it's genuinely like a scary scene. And it's just like shots of water reflecting off of a pool and sound. Like, it's all of the scares and all the tension in this movie come out of like really good editing, really good lighting, and really good sound design, I think.
Yeah,
and performance too. But like, it's like the filmmaking itself feels like the star of this movie.
Yeah. The really like contrasty lighting in some scenes, like some of the scary scenes, like where they're chasing each other down the alleyway, and then, you know, she gets in the bus and everything. Very, very cool. I didn't know that the pool scene was famous, but that really checks out, because like, I was like, oh, I guess It Follows was basically just like riffing on this scene.
Oh, dang. I haven't seen It Follows still, somehow. I'll probably notice that even more now than I would have.
Yeah. It Follows is very, very good, but like there's like a climactic with very similar vibes, like a climactic horror scene where people are sitting in the middle of a pool in order to stay, like, of an indoor pool, in order to stay away from like a potential threat on the outside of the pool.
Yeah, I mean, that happens in this movie. I do kind of like comparisons to The Wolfman, because I think this works in so many ways that one doesn't. I think this movie is incredibly atmospheric and is also very restrained.
Probably out of necessity, but
right?
Yeah.
But it's like, it feels like this movie was like fairly low budget for when it was made. So this movie is directed by Jacques Tourneur, French director who has directed a bunch of other good stuff. But it feels like the kind of auteur of this movie is the producer, Val Lewton. In 1942, was put in charge of, RKO started a like horror division. They're like, Val Lewton, you're in charge of making horror movies for RKO. You're gonna get like this amount of money for each one, and we're gonna give you the titles. So they just gave him the title Cat People. We're like, go whatever you want to do with Cat People, but it has to be called Cat People. And Val Lewton was a writer, and so I think he either wrote or had already written a story about sort of like spooky, like jaguar people or whatever. I think he also produced a movie in 43 called The Leopard Man. So he's got a real sort of like, cats are scary thing going on.
This is also, by the way, the anti bringing up baby.
Yes,
it is like it's like opposite of Wolfman and also bring up baby.
Yeah. The sort of Val Lewton Jacques Tourneur collaboration is like very, I don't know, fruitful. Like this was like the first of these bunch of movies that they made, but I think it's kind of still regarded as one of, if not the best one. I haven't seen most of the other ones, but yeah, it feels like it was made with a lot less resources than something like The Wolfman. Like there aren't really a lot of elaborate sets. Like they reuse the sets from Magnificent Ambersons for like the apartment staircase, and I think some of the other interiors. The staircase is definitely from Ambersons though.
Wow, you know what? I watched Cat People right after I watched Magnificent Ambersons,
didn't pick up on
somehow
it.
I didn't catch that, even though when I saw them on the staircase in that movie, I was like, oh wow, this is an interesting shot right here.
They're like, this staircase looks awful familiar. I feel like the Wolfman will just be like, all right, turn into a werewolf. What are we gonna do now? Just like cut to a shot of him walking through the woods as a wolf. Whereas this movie like is kind of a monster movie, but it barely shows any sort of monster. It's all like suggestion and shadows and sounds.
There's like no effects in this movie.
Yeah.
Like Wolfman has bad effects. This movie just has no effects, but it is effective.
So much better. And it's like, when you just hear like an echoey growl coming from like down a dark hallway, that's so much scarier than like seeing a janky like cat person or something, I guess there's no like hybrid cat person in this movie. It's like she's either a woman or she is a panther.
Yeah. But we don't get a full anamorph scene in this movie.
But also even that, like, you don't it's not really that explicit until like the last scene of the movie almost, that it's like that she even is turning into, spoilers for cat people, that she turns into a jaguar or a panther.
Right. I think that's kind of interesting. Like, I think it does draw it out a little bit too far, but this movie plays in a very pleasing way with this kind of idea of like how much. So it's like based on this sort of Eastern European legend about like
that I'm pretty sure is entirely made up. Like, I don't think that is a real.
It seems made up, yeah. Like when she was like, "Oh yes, this legend of cat people in my old Serbian town," I'm just like, okay, so you're just kind of taking part in just like, oh, the weird Europeans over in Eastern Europe, like they do weird stuff, and we don't. We're gonna, just ostracize them in some way,
Val Lewton I don't think he was Serbian, but he was from somewhere in Eastern Europe. Let me look it up real quick. Val Lewton was Ukrainian.
Okay. All right. Well,
but so he was like, Serbians. They have made up weird cat legends. Right. So the main character, Arena, played by Simon, which is a great name for an actor to have, who is French, if you couldn't tell by the name. And I like how she's supposed to be Serbian in this movie, and she's just French.
It's definitely not that obvious, but yeah.
I don't know. I thought, at least at times, I'm like, she sounds incredibly French, despite the fact that she's supposed to be Serbian. Maybe she's trying to do a little bit of an accent, but I mean, also of note of this movie is, as far as I can tell, you mentioned before the scene where they're like, someone's being stalked down a street and then a bus shows up. That is, as far as I know, the first movie jump scare. And it has been like pointed out as such, because like for a while the jump scare was called the Luton bus because of this movie. Of like, oh, they did a Luton bus. whenever there was a jump scare in a movie. Which is like,
I mean,
it's like quiet and scary,
been,
and then a bus shows up and it's real loud and sudden.
There have been other notable bus jump scares in movies.
Have there?
I'm thinking of Mean Girls.
Oh, you're saying like not previous to this, but just in general.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Mean Girls is like specifically being like, we're doing a Luton bus here. We're doing a cat people, but like maybe, I don't know. Tina Fey's smart.
Yeah. Mean Girls is catty people.
Well done. It's also funny that I feel like it's like a jump scare as a fake out too, which I think is like a specific type of jump scare. I think that is even more specific, like what the Luton bus is. It's like jump scare. Oh, it was nothing. It's just a bus. But I also think that's funny. I'm pretty sure my phone professor pointed this out, that like cats are so often used in that role in horror movies. So it's funny that like the scary thing in this movie is a cat, and yet it's the bus that's like the fake out. Like there's like stuff in, I think the first Alien movie, like I think Halloween, like lots of movies have like, oh, it was just a cat.
There were a lot of cats that scared me in the movie Cats.
Yeah, true. Arguably a scarier cat movie than this one. I like how often there are just like cats in scenes in this movie too. Like cats are very ubiquitous throughout the whole thing, of just like there are always cats around.
Yeah, even like when they're in a museum, she's like posed behind a like a big old like ancient Egyptian cat guy statue.
Yeah.
Which same deal in Wolfman, where it's like, oh look, this cane has a wolf on it. So like echoing its I don't know, iconography throughout the movie.
Yeah, I feel like there's definitely some plot stuff in this movie that I don't love. I like the general setup of it, but I think some of the writing is maybe a little bit blunt, or just sort of like, I wish it had a little bit more kind of nuance to it. Like, right, Irena like falls in love and immediately marries this architect.
Like
Oliver.
The next day.
Right, like the next day, and he is like immediately patronizing to her and like not a very good romantic partner. And she's like, no, we cannot kiss. We cannot do anything because I'm too afraid of the evil that lives within me. And he's like, all right, fine. Like, whatever, you take as much time as you need. It's all fine. Like, I'm here for you. And then like immediately is like having lunch with his coworker, and his coworker is like, I think I love you. And he's like, interesting. And so then Irena starts following them and like stalking, was it Alice, who's the coworker? She's the person who gets, chased onto the bus and chased into the pool.
She's the scream queen of this movie.
Yeah. But it's also funny, like, Alice isn't like really framed as like a bad person. She has that funny line where she's like, I'm the new type of other woman. I'm likable.
Yeah, it's interesting that this movie is kind of like interrogating this idea of like the work wife, Oh,
yeah.
like oh yeah, she's my work wife. And then and then problematizing it immediately. I don't know, I guess like it's like you were saying, it's kind of interesting that there isn't like a straight up good or bad person in
the
this
psychiatrist
movie. Honestly,
is
like,
a bad guy.
The
psychiatrist is a villain.
be...
He's the only one I think that really dies in the movie. So it's like he gets a gruesome death via Panther getting his throat ripped out. Because he is just terrible. He is just horrendously awful. And also he has a sword cane. Why does he have a sword cane?
He has a sword cane, but like
if you
also
can tell he was a villain, he does have a sword cane.
Yes, he's a terrible guy, but also he has the best lines in the movie, which are there is in some cases a psychic need to let loose evil upon the world.
I wrote that one down.
And then all of us carry within us a desire for death.
Also, another one that I think is very funny is the law is very clear. One cannot divorce an insane person.
Yeah.
Also, his advice as a doctor is basically just be normal. That's like his end, sort of like, I've given it a lot of thought, and I think you should just ignore all the things that are bothering you and just be normal. And it's like, yeah, great advice, doc.
Works for me.
Yeah. 1940s psychiatry.
It's very funny, these like old-timey psychiatry, like obviously stupid psychiatry suggestions. I mean, who knows, like maybe this is not necessarily a fully accurate portrayal of psychiatry as it existed in the 40s. But I think it's funny that like he speaks with such like institutional expertise, like, oh, we know the way the human mind works.
Yeah.
Like, I know what's right for you. And had psychiatry existed for like more than 50 years? Like, not really.
Well, what did they learn in those 50 years? Every person contains within them the desire for chaos and death. Sounds about right. I want to shout out a couple of like just really cool little bits of kind of filmmaking, in especially sort of to kind of show the there's no real transformation scene in this, but there is the bit of the sort of, you see the muddy panther footprints turn into shoe footprints with like the sound of footsteps going over them. It's a very similar shot in Wolfman.
There's a part that I couldn't tell how much of a transformation sequence it was, like where you just see her as a person, and then you see like a panther attacking the psychiatrist in shadow. And it seemed like possibly the shadows were indicating some kind of transformation, but it all happened so fast that it was kind of hard to tell.
It is the kind of like, the movie is, I think, purposely ambiguous for a while of sort of like, how much is she literally turning into a giant panther, and how much is she maybe letting a panther out of the zoo every night to murder people for her. Which would also be a super sick movie, you know. But I do like how by the end of it, it's like there are two panthers. One of them is Irina.
Is a lady. Yeah.
One of them is a lady. There's also
a panther is a lady.
A great shot where after she has like a big fight with her terrible husband, Irina's sitting on the couch and like just like runs her hand along the back of the cushion, and it's like creates like claw scratches in the cushion.
Yeah.
And it's just like, yes, movies.
Oh, like just other like cool stuff in this movie. There's almost like a slight, almost like a deconstructive jump scare a little bit. Also in like, he's returning to his architecture office that he works at, and he sees the revolving door move by itself. It's like, oh my God, like what's going on over there? And then it's almost like a gag, like, but it's kind of scary too, where like, you know, you look down and it sees that there's like somebody scrubbing the floor and like inside of the revolving door, and that is what like made it move in a scary way.
But it's like this movie is filled with stuff like that, just like little scary little you know, fake outs, little scary bits, and then just like so much great atmosphere. And it feels like also like the horror of this movie is so like psychological. Like it is ostensibly kind of a monster movie, but it feels much more like it feels like a much more psychological horror movie than something like The Wolfman, or really most of the Universal movies up to this point.
Oh yeah, I mean, because most of the movie does not really concern being a monster. Most of the movie concerns being afraid of becoming a monster, and or domestic tension. Like most of the movie is about domestic tension with this kind of idea of monsterism hanging in the corner.
I don't necessarily love how much I feel like this movie is trying to draw a parallel between like evil and sin and sexuality. Like it's very very like Irina is like, I can't kiss anyone or I will turn to a cat and murder them. And it feels like the movie is a little bit laying that on too much, like going a little too far in that direction of just being like, women shouldn't feel pleasure or they're monsters, kind of. I don't necessarily I don't think that is necessarily what this movie is trying to posit, but I think that combined with just some of its 1940s-ness is a bit like, I don't know how much of this movie's, I guess, sort of politics I might agree with.
You know, the funny thing is that it's like so common in horror movies to tie death and sexuality to each other that I didn't even really think about that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's not uncommon.
I mean, something that I did notice along those lines was that there is an element of like, you know, this as the feminine to Wolfman's masculine, right? It's about like, there are points where you are kind of cheering her on to become
right.
panther.
Yeah, it's definitely like
and kill
when
people,
she kills the psychiatrist, it's like, hell yeah, that guy sucks.
Yeah, and so it's like there is this kind of aspect of this like feline feminine power in this movie.
Right.
The pussy power in this movie.
Hey, episode title.
I don't know if we can get away with that one.
It's referring to cats. It's okay.
Maybe it is okay. I don't know.
You're using it in the British sense.
Oh, Buster.
A Thoroughly Polite Dust Up, the fictional film from Arrested Development, I think is from 1942. So just throwing that out there.
I don't know if this movie kind of gives me the vibe of being terrified of women. I think it is like portraying and kind of in awe of a certain mysterious female power that is so powerful that even she is scared of her own self.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's definitely like a lot of ways to pick that apart, but like I was inclined to look at it charitably, I guess.
I feel like I go back and forth on it. Like I think I rewatched it again today, and I think I was maybe feeling a bit more down on it. I don't know. I think the first 2 times I watched it, I was, for whatever reason, also maybe just like watching it on my laptop, I like wasn't as engaged or like, you know, as into it as I had been seeing it in. I also saw this in a theater back in October, which was great. Getting a lot of theater watches in for this episode.
Nice.
Yeah, I don't know. There's just a lot of talk of like, you know, corrupt passion and such, and I'm just like, all right, movie, like, like feeling sexual desire is not like the most horrifying thing in the world.
No, it's only the second most.
But I also think, right, it is. I think you're right. The movie isn't positing that. I think it is the characters that feel that way. And so this movie is very much about like sexual repression, also.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really think it is a like pro repression movie.
You know, it's funny. Like another aspect of it, like, you know, I was saying that like, you know, death and sex are tied together in so many horror movies, so I didn't notice it. But also the other thing that I didn't notice is that even, you know, I noticed it a little bit, but I didn't really think about like this movie like having sexual repression on its mind, because like I could tell like, oh, if I kiss someone I'll turn into a cat and kill people, but like the kind of chasteness of this movie is so typical of like the post-code like Hollywood stuff that it only feels like a little bit extra, like a little bit more sexually repressed than like any other random movie from the 40s.
Yeah. Very true. Yeah, I think this movie rules though. And I've never seen the remake, the Paul Schrader 80s movie with the David Bowie theme song.
I like Schrader. I'm curious.
I've heard not great things about it, but I'm curious to see it. There's also a sequel called Curse of the Cat People that I think is like tangentially, I'm not really sure how it's a sequel, because it's like Simone Simon, which is, I looked up the correct pronunciation of her name, is also in it, but I think she plays like a ghost of her character in this movie. So
cat ghost.
Yeah. I do also think it's funny this movie kind of posits a like cat lady to witch pipeline, at least in old-timey Serbia, because it talks about Irina's mother was like had lots of cats and that people thought she was a witch.
Speaking of witches, great segue. We also watched You did it.
We also watched a movie called I Married a Witch that I wish it had an exclamation point in the title, but
or if it was like an anime title, it would be like I married a witch ? Exclamation point.
That's the best possible version of this. Yeah, with like several exclamation points and question marks afterwards.
Yeah,
not the most notable or important movie of 1942, but it seemed fun, so we watched it.
Yeah, you know what the funny thing is, like I was rather disappointed with this movie, to be honest, but like I think that it is informative to watch just a kind of like run-of-the-mill movie from our eras as well, right? And like not like a classic of great cinema, but just like Oh, okay. Well, I saw that. I watched The Fall Guy and I had a good time, you know.
Right. I think The Fall Guy is probably better than I Married a Witch, but
It's much better than I Married a Witch.
it,
Yeah, I like The Fall Guy a lot more than most
yeah,
people.
I thought The Fall Guy was great, but yeah, I Married a Witch it does kind of feel like sort of more of a just like standard. This was also playing at the time. This was just this wasn't one of the great classics. This was just one of the normal ones.
Yeah. And Criterion tricked us by releasing it and into thinking that it is a
You
great
tricked
classic.
us. I guess it is probably the most notable thing about it is that it stars Veronica Lake, who was a big star, kind of flash in the pan star. Like she didn't really have a career post 1940s. Like a lot of, I was like thinking up actors from this time period, and like so many of them died when they were in their 50s, which is crazy.
Yeah, they drank a lot of booze.
Yeah, I mean Veronica Lake was like apparently a raging alcoholic and died from liver disease, which like is very sad. But yeah, I'm like every time I look up why these people died so young, it's like, oh yeah, they smoked 18,000 cigarettes a day and drank 4 bottles of whiskey before 10 a.m. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, I mean that'll do it.
This feels a lot like it's like a proto Bewitched.
I also thought the same thing for sure. Also, I feel like we got to mention that Veronica Lake is basically Jessica Rabbit in terms of how she looks and her like hairstyle.
Huh. Yeah. I guess I need to see her in like a kind of
I mean, she doesn't have the absurdly exaggerated body proportions of Jessica Rabbit, but definitely Jessica Rabbit's I think like hair and face design are inspired pretty heavily by Veronica Lake.
Yeah, I mean, this movie also has Frederick March, who we've seen in a number of movies so far.
Classic comedy star.
Frederick March apparently said a not too kind thing about Veronica Lake in regard to that, calling her a brainless little blonde sex pot void of any acting ability. Which
tell us how you really feel.
Yeah, regardless of all of the gender politics and whatnot. It's quite a burn, I will say.
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't think that she's a very good actor in this. So
I think she's fine.
I don't know. I didn't think she was doing a great job.
I was charmed. I feel like this movie is so kind of like light and kind of fluffy and a little kind of frivolous feeling anyway, that it is like it's I don't know what else I would expect from any of the performances in it.
Yeah, fair. I wish that this movie, like, that I was a little more sold on the romance in this movie. And I wish I was a little more sold on the comedy in this movie, I guess.
It definitely feels sort of a piece, and it is like tonally, in terms of the style of humor in it, feels like it's going for a very similar thing to a lot of the other screwball comedies that we've watched, like Lady Eve or Bringing Up Baby, but it's just not as well made as those. Really, it doesn't feel like it has doesn't have the the je ne sais quoi of those.
Je ne sais.
Like I think Frederick March is even sort of like pushing himself to a more sort of like Cary Grant-esque performance of exasperated, like, oh no, what's my fiance gonna think when there's a lady in my bed? And he doesn't. I mean, he's not nearly as cartoonish as Cary Grant is, and I think had this movie starred like Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn or other people, it probably would have been.
This would have been so much better,
right? But then that's like they can't all be winners, right? I think this movie is perfectly enjoyable. Like I had fun watching this.
Yeah, I think that like maybe I am left with a bit of a bad taste in my mouth of this movie, specifically because like the beginning of it I think is pretty solid, but then there's a turn partway through the movie where it kind of turns from a comedy into a romance, basically into a romance, right. And I think that second half does not work that well. Like the first half I think is really intriguing, where like the setup is basically that there was a guy in Pilgrim times who burned a witch at the stake and sealed her and her wizard, her sorcerer father
Warlock, I
inside
believe
of an
warlock
oak
is the
tree.
correct nomenclature on that.
I don't think they use that nomenclature.
I think
in the
they say
movie, though.
sorcerer in the movie. Yeah.
Also, apparently, pre Harry Potter, there might have been. I think that like the genderization of witch and warlock, witch and wizard, is like I've heard is kind of a post Harry Potter thing.
Well, I mean,
where
right,
it wasn't
like,
so.
Lots of people were like accused of witchcraft who were men. Like witch as a like purely feminine word, I think is also a little bit a more modern thing. I think in the olden times it was like anyone who did spells, you were a witch.
Yeah. But anyway, they are sealed inside of an oak tree, and finally, and the witch and the sorcerer like cast a curse upon his family to never find love, or never be satisfied in love, and so that curse goes on through their lineage up until modern era.
I do really like
where,
this like series of scenes of like different eras of all of the bad marriages that are happening, and it's all like
that was fun.
It's all I think it's a couple different actors, but I especially like when it's just Frederick March in like mutton chops and things.
Yeah, they're all all of the characters I think are played by Frederick March in different makeup and wigs and everything. And
another thing I love in movies is like whenever they're like, here's a portrait of like my great ancestor, and it's the same actor, with just like with like a different hair and like a beard.
That's good.
It's
that's
like
funny.
I always love it if it's supposed to be taken seriously or if it's a joke. I'm always happy.
And so like the kind of impetus of the movie is that a lightning strikes the oak tree and they're freed from their prison after hundreds of years, and so they go on to like in this movie, like witches and sorcerers are legitimately evil.
They're also like not humans. They're like other beings. They're like supernatural creatures more than they are like people who cast spells.
I mean, I think it's kind of an unavoidable problem when you want to do a movie like this or similar to this, but like
you're kind of endorsing the Salem witch trials by saying witches
exactly,
are real.
Yeah. But like if you want witches to be real and you also want to include witch burnings in your movie, you have to like go like, okay, well sometimes the witch trials were good. Which is an uncomfortable assertion to make.
It is funny to see kind of how some movies try to like get around that, or sort of like, we're not endorsing any of the many, many, many murders that happened.
It's just this one was okay.
Right.
But so they start out the movie basically like, all right, time to wreak some more havoc. Let's light a building on fire. Let's go find this guy who's the descendant of the people who, the guy who burned me. And we're just going to ruin his life. Like, let's think about a way to make his time bad. And I think that they could also have had a lot more fun with this part. Like they could have gone a lot harder into like the screwball comedy of like, how are we gonna like mess with this guy? But anyway, I think that it is interesting that like her angle of how she's going to like mess with him is she's going to instantiate herself as a sexy lady and then basically like violently manic pixie dream girl him.
Manic witchy dream girl.
She's a manic witchy dream girl, but like rather than it being like this kind of poor writing experience, it is her using those kind of like that the kind of susceptibility to manic pixie dream girls of guys in movies and like using it to like harass and hurt him as much as she can, which I think is a sort of an interesting use of that trope, even though it's only barely a trope at this point.
Right. It's like it's kind of just like the trendy way to do a romance movie when this comes out, which is kind of funny. Yeah, that's definitely the more enjoyable part of the movie when it's more screwball, it's more wacky, it's more about like what kind of crazy gags are going to happen. There are some crazy gags later in the movie, but right, because even then the actual like the turn I think that you're talking about in the romance is when she tries to give him a love potion so that he will like permanently fall in love with her instead of his fiance, but then she drinks it by accident instead. So then she falls in love with him.
Gag. Yeah, it is a great gag. I thought it was really funny when it swapped around to
Yeah.
her drinking the love potion, but then it just doesn't work after that point.
But then it also is like this romance is built on this sort of like literally magic. It's just like, oh yeah, these people have no reason to actually like care about each other, but then because magic happens, now they suddenly do.
Right.
And so it feels a little shortcutty, maybe, even though it is a very funny gag in the scene. And then I don't know, there's some of the bits later with like I really like the kind of wedding set piece where it like
the wedding singer
they
is
keep
good.
starting the wedding, and the singer keeps singing the same song to like get the wedding started again like 8 times, and it gets funnier and funnier every time. So by the last
Kind of like
they
did that bit in Spaceballs too, so that might be
a lot of like
a bit of a
proto
callback.
Mel Brooks stuff in the early 40s. I mean, this is another movie that does have a lot of like cats equal femininity equal like supernatural, which is kind of funny that like both this and cat people have just like that in common with each other, like that those things, which I guess are like there are roots to that that wasn't invented in 1942. I just think it's interesting that like that's so ubiquitous, I guess, that it's like cat so supernatural and feminine. even male cats, like there's just like connotations to it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure, like, I think that the association with cats and witches had already kind of been, established. And yeah, there's,
and then like
I mean,
cats and the supernatural, I think probably might even go back to like ancient Egypt. I think there's, like cats and the afterlife and all that jazz.
Well, there's the
mummies.
there's
cat mummies.
There's just the kind of cliche gender kind of associations that have existed in a long time of cats are feminine and men are dogs.
Men are from Mars and women are from Venus.
The only other thing that I have to say about this is that there's a point where they are shocked at the differences in the world as they have kind of arrived in the 1940s from the 1600s or whatever. And so they are floating around as like mist spirits or something. And they happen across 2 people outside of a party that have some dialogue that is loaded up with 40s slang, specifically because it's like, this is confusing the people from old. This is like feels very out of touch, or it feels very different from the way that they understand the English language. But then us looking back at it, it is also very different.
Want to feel old? So, we're as far from the 1940s as the 1600s were.
And the words they say are incredible. They say, "What's knitting, kitten? Would you like to cut a rug?" And then she says, "Let's ditch these ickies. How about we go to heaven in your jalopy?" And then he says, "That's solid, Jackson. Now you're cooking on the front burner."
But I know what all of that means, so I don't know what that says about me. What's knitting, kitten is very good.
It's great. What's knitting, kitten is
and
fantastic.
It reminds me a lot of Go Peel and Eel, and it 1930s 40s rhyming slang, I guess, was a thing. Not in the same way that Cockney rhyming slang is, but like, I do like expressions like "go peel and eel" and "what's knitting, kitten" for sure.
There's also like "let's ditch these ickies" is pretty good.
"Let's ditch these ickies" is very good. We gotta bring this back.
Yeah, I can't.
We're young and hip.
I need a like a cheat sheet of old terms so that I can remind myself.
It's funny because I've looked those up and they do exist, but I feel like they're missing a lot of the really fun sort of expressions that we found just watching old movies. Like, I think like "go cut a rug" is something that is probably on some like 30s 40s slang cheat sheets, but "knit and kitten" and "ditch these ickies" I've never heard anywhere else besides this movie. So.
Also, I'm surprised at the raciness of "how about we go to heaven in your jalopy." Like, that's...
Well, there's even like, because in 1940s American English, saying "making love" just meant like making out with someone. Like it was like full. And so there's a lot of 40s movies where people are like, "Ah, yes, mother, he's making violent love to me in the kitchen." And it's like, what? It's like it wasn't as
so...
it didn't mean as much in the 1940s as it does now. So
see, that is I'm a little uncertain about that, because I had kind of heard that, I've started hearing that in this context, and I was like, oh, I guess it just means making out. But I feel like there were some uses of it in movies that we have seen lately, like one or two, where it seemed to imply a bit more than making out.
That might just be the movie being a little cheeky. I don't know.
But I'm guessing, but there was some point where the term "making love" shifted, right? And
it moved up. It moved up a couple bases in the base team.
yeah, it scored a home run. But we can either this is something that I've been actively tracking of when the
etymology
shifts.
of making love.
I love etymology. The sexiest thing ever. But I was thinking okay, there must be a point where it shifts. But then when I heard those ones that seemed to have a bit more insinuation in them, I wondered if in some contexts it just means making out, but given the censorship that they were dealing with, right? Maybe it always had a broader context where in certain casual settings, it could mean an umbrella term for all types of hanky panky, right? And and so maybe they were able to kind of get away with a lighter insinuation under the code, but then it always kind of implied a larger scope of what things were. Anyway, certainly by the 60s it meant sex, and that's only 15-20 years from now. So that would be a very fast lexical shift, if so.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense that it was an umbrella term, and maybe under the Hays Code, it was sort of it tended to be used in a slightly less risque context. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd like to look this up, but probably looking up the history of making love is not going to find me the results that I'm looking for. You gotta use quotes.
Another movie we watched that features animals is Bambi.
Yeah. And animals in love.
True. Another movie that gets romantic in the last half an hour. I mean, I had seen Bambi as a kid multiple times. It was a VHS. It was we had the clamshell growing up.
Yeah.
But I hadn't watched it in 20 years easily, I feel like.
Yeah, same. I'm pretty sure I watched it, but it was so long ago that I really have no memory.
And I was like, oh yeah, Bambi. Bambi's a swell picture, whatever, deer in the woods, sad. And I think Bambi kind of rules. I watched this movie and I was like, does Bambi rule? Is Bambi just a really kick-ass movie?
I wouldn't argue with you on that point. It is a really
I think people remember
really different and interesting movie.
Two things in this movie. People remember the death of Bambi's mother, which is heartbreaking, and people remember the very early scenes of young Bambi experiencing the world for the first time and sort of learning to speak and talking to birds and things.
Yes.
People do not remember the Bambi fighting a pack of wild dogs, hunting dogs, and having a expressionistic fight with another male deer and getting chucked off a mountain. There's a lot in this movie I did not remember being in the movie, I guess.
Yeah, I think that because this movie isn't very plotty, I think a lot of people forget about the things. This movie is just a bunch of stuff happening.
Sure.
And normally I would mean that as an insult, but I don't mean it here.
Yeah. I think being animated works. It works better as a less plotty movie because it's animated and it is you're just seeing stuff happening and you're like, this is gorgeous. Look at what is happening on screen right now.
Yeah. So what's your angle on the kick-assness of Bambi?
I mean, it looks incredible. Like the animation in this movie is like eye-meltingly gorgeous, I think. Which,
Mhm.
yeah, again, like I remember this being, a very well animated, like good, colorful movie. But I think, yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's also the fact that it's like, I'm seeing a like really pristine restoration on Disney Plus that is like very colorful, very bright.
It looked a little DNR'd to me,
It
but
it probably was. But I think by and large, like you can see, especially in the backgrounds, you can see the painterliness of them.
yeah.
I think this movie's more expressionistic than I remembered it being. That was a big one where it's like it is really playing not necessarily with like different animation styles, but I was like, I was reminded more of Into the Spider-Verse watching Bambi than I thought it would be. It
Yeah,
doesn't go
yeah.
nearly that far, like not even close, obviously, but
Well,
it is like
because
it's doing a lot more with like abstract shapes and colors and things like that than I thought it would,
because
or
this
I remembered
movie,
it doing.
apart from a couple of specific moments that use kind of expressionistic imagery to get feelings across, like, and that all happens when Bambi's an adult.
There's a little bit of earlier on, but yeah, most of it's like in the last 30-40 minutes of the movie. Yeah.
And like, so the beginning of this movie especially, but the movie in general, is so obsessed with reality. It is like, this movie took an extra long time to make because they wanted to, like, they were like, we can't crack the deer animation. We need the deer animation to look so real, and like we need to like put this on the back burner for a little while we like hone our skills, basically, in order to do Bambi. I believe it was supposed to be the first movie that they were going to do. So like there are so many things that this movie is just like obsessed with, like minute details of textures in the forest and like the motion of limbs, like the animal like anatomy. Like this movie is like so much about like the physical anatomy of animals.
But it is also, it's blending really recognizable physical anatomy of animals with really recognizable human expression.
It draws like a really good line between like,
Threads that needle so well. Like the way in which it is like, I fully recognize that this is like animal behavior, and yet it is being sort of anthropomorphized, to use a big
just enough
word.
just
Right.
enough.
But it's like the way that the owl kind of shifts weight in the beginning, and just like, the like Thumper's expression when he's like talking to his mom versus talking to Bambi, like whole body language shift, but it's like still looks like a rabbit, and it's like just the little nose twitching in the rabbits, the way that any of the deer move and walk, and yet it's like they feel like real characters. Their facial animation still feels very reminiscent of human expression.
Yeah, it's not just in character design, but in movement, like you're saying.
Yeah.
Like they are just human enough in order for us to recognize their emotions clearly and project our emotions onto them clearly. But compared to a lot of other animated animal movies, there's like a more of a realism to these. Like, and so much more, like I was saying with the animal anatomy, so much more of just like scenes that really are just all about these animals moving, like Bambi on the ice, right? Where like there's not much to that scene except like watch the way the muscles inside of this deer move.
No, but it is
in
like
kind of like a funny way,
but
right?
it's becoming kind of, there's a bit of like kind of dance in there too. It feels like the closest thing I would compare that scene to is like a dance scene, even though it is like animals trying to walk on ice, but it has that kind of like, there's communication happening between them that is nonverbal. There's like, we see it's revealing personality of both of them. Like we're getting a fuller sense of both those characters purely about just how they're walking on ice, and yet it is also like, I believe that's a deer and a rabbit.
Yeah,
that's how I would imagine they would dance on ice.
Oh, and like the one of the other kind of humanoid aspects of them is that like maybe this is the first anime, right? Like Bambi's eyes are so anime in this movie.
When was the actual first anime? Because did we pass it?
I know it was like 1903 or something like that.
Did we
If you
cover it
want to
on the
talk about like
show?
yeah, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I thought so. Yeah,
But I mean the first anime so like
the first big ol' eyeballs.
yeah, I mean, Osamu Tezuka is known as the godfather of anime. He basically single-handedly created the anime visual style.
Mm.
But Osamu Tezuka was he was like riffing off of Disney. His style was his own evolution on the Disney house style. And then like the anime look is an evolution on Osamu Tezuka's look.
Do you know if Bambi was ever cited as like a direct inspiration for that, or is that kind of conjecture just based on how the facial animation looks in Bambi?
It is conjecture.
I mean,
but
it makes
I will
sense.
say that
I can definitely see it.
It's conjecture in that, like, I bet if I looked into it, I would find something. But like,
right.
I was just noticing Bambi's eyes and looking like anime eyes, and I was like, I see it. It's real.
Yeah.
And I know for a fact that like Osamu Tezuka was like basically he was like super into Disney. He was a big Disney adult, Osamu Tezuka. But like he super like in awe and respect of the Disney style of animation and cartooning. And there's been this kind of mutual back and forth and everything. Like Osamu Tezuka like made manga that involved animals that had big anime eyes like Bambi. He made in I think the 50s or 60s it was a manga called Kimba the White Lion, which was then retaken back into Disney as they stole a lot of it for Lion King. I just read Osamu Tezuka's 4,000 page manga biography of Buddha, and it is so good. It was so good.
Incredible.
I was like, am I a Buddhist now? But it was a really good it's a really good manga. But anyway, I guess one other thing that I want to say about like the kind of like the realism cartooning part of it is that I touched on earlier was the way the forest is depicted. The way nature is depicted in this movie. And like you see like raindrops falling on leaves. The rain scene is so beautiful, and like the texture of bark and grass and the way it moves in the wind and all the stuff. It's like it's all like such careful observation, and it's not using cartooning. It sometimes it is, but like its premise doesn't seem to be using cartooning to like alter reality as much as like depict reality in a very constrained and controlled way.
I mean, it's funny because I feel like my takeaway from this movie was, I don't disagree with that, but I feel like my takeaway of this movie was how kind of like painterly it is and how much it is. It isn't that abstracted. It's like it's very, very well observed with all of it, like with the textures, with the movement of everything, of like every leaf, every animal. But it is like it feels like it is using animation the way that, I don't know, I feel like animation ought to be used, which is to sort of like create this heightened version of something. Like, I know Disney has threatened to remake this movie as one of their like weird CGI like photoreal remakes, and I'm like, why would you do this to Bambi is perfect as
he's already been through enough,
right? Like, but what could you possibly get out of like a literal photoreal CGI deer on the ice?
Oh god,
it would just be terrible.
I was aware of this.
The eyes would be so small.
Until you said photoreal CGI deer, I didn't picture it. And now that I've pictured it, I hate it so much
it's
more.
Like it's just worse in every way. So it's like Disney, if you're listening, Disney the company, Bob Iger, if you're listening to this, please do not remake Bambi as a CGI monstrosity. I have not seen either of the two Lion King movies, but I'm like, I have so little interest because I'm just like, I don't want to see a realistic looking lion sing a song because lions don't have facial expressions.
I like Jungle Book okay, but I don't know about those other ones.
Yeah. But so I don't know. It's funny how much, because you're right. There is like so much realism being put into this movie, and yet it is my biggest takeaway from it was sort of how expressionistic and how painterly and how like animated it was. And just how gorgeous all of that is. Like it's so well done. A beautiful film. Oh, Bambi. Also this movie's rated G, and yet it is heartbreaking.
Doesn't deserve that G.
It is heartbreaking. It is scary. It is I don't know, violent. Sure, there's fights in it. There's no like, blood or viscera or anything, not a lot of death, but I think the death that is in this movie is like, you feel it.
Yeah.
I'm not just talking about Bambi's mom either, which is like so heartbreaking. And also so much of it because you don't see very much. It's like very restrained. And it's like just like the finality of it. It's just like, it's so sad.
Yeah. I think that like this, like Fantasia, is not a movie that's like not kid friendly, quote unquote, but it is a movie that is not real. It doesn't really feel like it's for kids.
I think it is for kids, but it also doesn't feel like it is. It never feels like it's talking down to the audience, even though it does feel like it is intended for I do feel like it is largely intended for. I mean, it's the proper implementation of a family movie, and that is like young kids, I think, can watch this and get a lot out of it.
Considering the number of people who like cannot
cite this as
over
like a heartbreaking, like traumatic experience.
Considering the number of people who can't get over Bambi's mom dying in the movie, I don't think that this movie is appropriate for younger children. I think that like one of the things that's really good about this movie and interesting about this movie is that it confronts death directly. And it confronts like the trauma of death directly, but it also confronts like the pedestrianness of death directly. And like how like your parents are going to die. And I feel like the reason why this movie scarred so many people is because it might have been their first understanding of an idea that their parents might die. Right? Like I think that like this movie is doing something a bit more mature than what a young child can handle. I think it is treating life and death in this way that is kind of speaking on these greater kind of ideas of existing in the world, and it's grappling with them directly in a way that I don't think younger children can handle.
I think it depends on the kid. I don't know. I mean, I don't have children, so I'm talking kind of out of my ass here. But I do think so many people cite Bambi as a thing that like scarred them as a kid. I feel like a lot of those same people cite this as one of their favorite movies, or like something that inspired them to like get into animation or filmmaking. I think a lot of things that people cite as a like traumatic film experience can sometimes also then be the thing that like that ends up inspiring them later in life or earlier in life. Like,
sure.
So I mean, I think that kind of thing very much depends on the kid. And I also, I'm so opposed to the idea of like talking down to kids, especially like through art, that I think this is a fairly safe way to introduce a young child to the idea of death.
Yes.
Whether or not you want to do that is another question, but it is sort of like, I would show them this before I'd show them a lot of other movies that deal with death as directly as this does.
Yeah. I mean, I think that like death is stark in this movie, right? I don't intend on talking down to children or underestimating their capabilities at all. I just think that like
this movie's rated G, and maybe
Maybe some parental guidance
maybe
is
put a P in
suggested.
there.
I think that to get onto this like subject of death in the movie, I see a lot of similarity between this movie and Princess Mononoke.
Oh yeah.
This movie, both of them are kind of like two major kind of themes going on in both of these movies are life and death in nature, and how life and death in nature are things that are unremarkable. They are part of the world. Living and dying are part of the world. The cycle continues. I think it's very notable that in this movie, after Bambi's mom dies, he realizes what happens and then it moves on, right? Like, it does not dwell on his mom dying, which surprised me
It moves
watching
on
this.
remarkably quickly.
It surprised me because like so many people think about that scene so much, but like it does not fixate on it. It is just like deer's parents die and then they grow up and become bigger deer, right? And then the other kind of theme, obviously, that this and Princess Mononoke share is about like, you know, man versus nature, right?
Yeah.
And specifically like the corruption of nature by men.
It is pretty notable that the only death in this movie comes from guns. There are no, like, Bambi never has to like fight, other than the the hunting dogs, never has to fight like a predator. There's no like mountain lion or bear. Death is never like circle of life. Like, the wolf has to eat also. The wolf has to feed its young. That is never addressed. There are no predators in this movie. The only predator is man indiscriminately shooting animals.
Yeah, there's no like kind of uncomfortable Lion King sort of we eat them, it's okay kind of thing.
Yeah, but it is like, I think it kind of gets into kind of like the randomness of death also, and that it isn't like none of the death in this movie is like feels justified. It always feels shocking and like it is like breaking the natural order of things.
Yeah. Like humans feel like such a corruption on the beauty that is existing in this world.
They feel like humans are like a supernatural like horror in this movie.
Yeah, you never see
they're
the
unseen.
humans. Yeah. And this movie's also coming from the perspective of a deer, right? A deer always wants to run away from people.
There's a scene with a pheasant, right? That's like that's afraid.
That's
and
they
keep coming closer, and it's like, don't fly, don't fly, don't fly. We'll die if we fly. And that, oh my god, that scene was like,
I feel like that scene almost hit harder than Bambi's mom.
Same. I think because it hadn't been like hyped up. Like, I didn't remember that scene, so I was just like, oh my, this is horrifying. This is like really upsetting. Yeah, G-rated movie. What a choice it is never to show humans in this movie.
Yeah.
Like, what a
it's an interesting choice.
A powerful artistic choice to have humanity be this off-screen horrific threat that will just appear seemingly at random and just cause widespread death and destruction.
I think that if they showed humans, it would allow other humans to say, it would allow people watching the movie to say, that's these guys, not this could be us, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I think that this movie is basically saying, like, what is your responsibility when it comes to treating animals with respect and nature with respect? Like, and I've apparently a lot of people have become vegetarians after seeing this movie.
Not
I see
surprising.
why.
Yeah.
But like, also, like, this movie was the beginning of Bambi was the first animal mascot of "Do Not Start a Forest Fire." Like, because
watching that scene today really hit hard.
Oh yeah, I guess that's true. Disney licensed out Bambi to the Forest Service, I guess it was, to use him as their kind of mascot for anti like be careful about starting a forest fire stuff. And then when that license ran out, that's when they created Smokey the Bear. without showing the humans, right? It's like, yes, you could be the one starting this forest fire. You're hurting Bambi. You
Yeah.
could be the one shooting this gun. You're hurting Bambi. Where, like, you know, maybe like a movie like The Fox and the Hound or something like that, which is one of my early childhood favorites.
Yeah.
But like, it has like,
what a movie that is.
but
Heartbreaking.
it has like specific humans, and you're like, oh, they're the bad ones. They're not me, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a very good point. I hadn't thought about it, I guess, that specifically, or like in those terms. But I think there's a real power to not showing them in this movie.
Yeah, they don't even show the guns. They they don't even like have
totally
the
off-screen.
guns like point up or at the pheasant or something like that.
And I think makes it scarier. That's like, you don't know where they even are in relation to the animal.
Yeah.
Like, it's just this thing that comes out of nowhere.
It makes the humans alien, because like, this is like a world where they are alien to it.
Yeah.
But like, along the death stuff, I mean, it's kind of territory we already covered, but like, you know, Princess Mononoke, I think like one of the really beautiful things about that movie is that it takes this idea of the naturalness of life and death, and like how the meaninglessness of life and death. And it's like, death and life are a part of the same thing. They're a part of nature. Like, there is a part of dying that is sad. Just like there's a part of autumn that is sad. But it is like, there is no such thing as like like you can perceive it in the moment, but there's no such thing in the scheme of this like unfeeling, beautiful and terrible world, and like beautiful and scary world, that like there's no such thing as being sad about death, right? Like, one of my favorite metaphors from Princess Mononoke is the forest god, who, you know, is a deer. He's
I
he's
do
a,
like a creature, perhaps.
Yeah, definitely a reference to Bambi. But
do you think it is a direct reference to Bambi, or do you think it is just sort of like, no, this is what we use to represent a you know, if you're going to sort of not personify, but you're going to manifest the forest into a single creature.
The Prince of the Forest in Bambi is like a majestic deer that everybody stops and stares at, and that is exactly what happens in Princess Mononoke.
Yeah, it is true. Also, even just the way that those scenes are kind of play out are pretty similar. It's true.
But like, one of the things that I find the most beautiful in that movie is how this forest god, who is in command of all life and death and is completely apathetic to life and death, but knows that they are interlinked, right? Like, every step that it takes on the ground, my favorite image from that movie, every step that it takes on the ground, plants grow up out of nothing, and then like grow and turn green, and then wither and die. And it does it over and over with every step as it touches the ground. It's like life and death all in one, all happening quickly, like instantaneously in this movie. And I think that Princess Mononoke kind of fleshes out these ideas more, where Bambi just kind of like depicts them. I think it depicts the unfeelingness of life and death in the natural world. And like, it is a scary thing, but it's also like a natural thing. There's a beauty to like the experiences of fear that Bambi has. They are real. They're like a part of nature. And that's why it's like such a big idea. And I think it's kind of hard for it might be rough on a 3-year-old, you know?
I mean, sure. Yeah. But yeah, I would show, you know, I think this movie depicts them, but I think it is right. It isn't like really getting into the nitty gritty the way that like Princess Mononoke is. I would not show Princess Mononoke to a 3-year-old. That movie is way too intense.
In some ways, I feel like the contextualization of Princess Mononoke kind of makes it an easier watch for younger kids. But I don't know if like shooting somebody's head off with a bow and arrow, maybe I'm just desensitized and I don't know that that's a big deal.
It can get pretty gory. Yeah, no, should we talk about the horny parts of Bambi also?
Oh yes, of course we should.
I think that's like kind of the next big sort of theme we should tackle in Bambi, is where right after the death of the mother, he meets his absentee dear father, the great prince of the forest, who's just like, your mother is gone, and he's like, okay, hard cut to spring. Like, all right, springtime. Months later, Bambi is now, teen Bambi
Teen Bambi.
with antlers.
They need a Teen Wolf show for
Teen
Teen
Bambi.
Deer. Yeah.
And so yeah, we get Teen Bambi, Teen Thumper, and Teen Flower, which I feel like we need to discuss. Flower is a character where I was like, how gay is Flower supposed to be? Because I certainly read it that way. I don't know if
his name is Flower.
His name is Flower. He's a skunk who seems, very excited when Bambi calls him a flower. I don't know. Yeah. I took it that way.
I thought that Flower was a girl.
Right. Up until Teen Flower was introduced with a deep voice, I was like, oh, yeah. Okay. That changes this character's relationship quite a bit. Well, maybe it doesn't. I don't know.
Yeah.
Because then Flower, and then immediately, so the three young forest animals are given a sex talk by the owl, which I thought was very funny. The owl is like, hey, you might meet another animal and feel some feelings.
It's the birds talk. There aren't any bees, but
there are no bees in this. It's just the birds talk. It's true.
There's some good like kind of physical comedy that is like the most reality breaking like motion that ever happens in this movie.
Yeah, it's the most kind of Looney Tunes-esque stuff, but very good. Like the spinning on the branch and like kind of the like walking in midair stuff. I thought was a lot of fun.
If you don't know what we're talking about, just imagine like all of the possible things that an owl could do to go hubba hubba a wooga.
Yeah, pretty much. But so then Flower's the first one to meet another skunk, who I definitely think is supposed to be a female skunk.
Yeah.
And so then now I'm starting to question how much, who knows? Maybe Flower's bi. We don't know. We know very little about Flower.
I mean, if you were to recolor that skunk tail into a bi flag, then into those colors, then it would turn into a bi flag. Yeah. Another thing, like with like gender in this movie, right? Like when I was a kid, I thought that Bambi was a girl.
Bambi has the big eyelashes. And
this movie confounds gender understanding in cartoons because boys have eyelashes, and that is not how cartoons work.
It's funny though that how much that is like, even I think by 1942, that is like we've established in cartoons, that like female characters have big eyelashes. That's how you can tell.
Eyelashes. Yeah.
I also thought watching this movie like feminine cartoon animals are always so funny to me, because it's like in so many cases it's like we drew this animal with like cartoonized, right? They have big eyes, they have exaggerated proportions, and then a lady one shows up and suddenly they have massive eyelashes, eyeshadow, and they're going like, hello, they're like sort of like pressing up their imaginary bosoms. They're like the most insanely like feminine looking version of an animal possible.
Fish, and then there's this other fish that's like va 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 voom.
Right, it's always like, wait, whoa. If you had any doubt of the gender of this fish, we're not making it remotely ambiguous, except in Bambi, right? Because when Bambi is a young deer, what's that called? Fawn.
Yeah.
He's got the big long lashes too.
You could say something about like maybe like the genderlessness of childhood, right? Before like especially if you're talking about like, the I don't know, instincts and hormones and animals, that like, Bambi becomes a man not through this I think is interesting. It is not his mom dying or some kind of moment of plot that turns Bambi into a man. It is incidental. It is just what happens, because as deer get older, they grow antlers and they turn into bucks, right? And so all of these, there's all of these younger animals that have these kind of more ambiguous gender situations.
Yeah, it's like I wonder how much of this, if any of it, was on the mind of the people making Bambi or not, or if they were just like a bunch of animals. I don't know. But it is certainly in a contemporary context where I feel like we have hopefully a slightly more nuanced understanding of gender. It stands out.
Yeah.
Also, I feel like Flower should have found another male skunk. I think that would have been a better ending for that character.
Maybe in the woke new movie they'll do that.
You know what? I would not be surprised. That's maybe the only thing you could do with Bambi that would improve it slightly while ruining all the other good parts of it.
Isn't that just like what they do with those live action Disney movies? Is they ruin it in every way, and
they would imply it, but they wouldn't even like give Flower an actual like subplot.
They ruin it in every way, and then they add like one little sprinkle of thing to say like first Disney movie that has a gay hug, and then they cut it out in China, right?
I would actually say that the character of Flower in original Bambi is about as much representation as gay characters are given in most contemporary Disney movies, where they're like, oh, we finally broke the barrier. We have a gay skunk in our movie, and it's like, well, not really. Ends up with a lady skunk.
And you know, very within mere moments. I don't know exactly when the debut is, but within years, skunk gender is set 50 years back with Pepe Le Pew.
Oh boy, yeah. There's an essay to be written about
skunk gender is maybe another good title.
gender studies through the prism of cartoon skunks.
I would read it.
Yeah. Some video essayist out there, make it happen.
There's like not a lot relative to every other Disney movie, it feels like. There doesn't seem like there's a lot said about this movie online. Like
I feel like a lot said about this movie in general. I feel like lots of people recognize Bambi, they recognize that Bambi exists, and it's usually in the context of wow, so sad when the mom dies.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like Bambi as a character doesn't usually get a lot of like, I don't know, I don't see Bambi included in a lot of like Disney montages. I feel like it doesn't get talked about enough in like the Disney canon.
Yeah.
You know? Especially compared to a lot of like even this era of Disney movies like Snow White, Dumbo, like the other ones that we didn't watch Dumbo for the show, but like the kind of first couple years of Disney animated features. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it doesn't get a lot of talk.
Everyone knows Bambi, but nobody thinks about Bambi. And what I say is think about Bambi.
Maybe the last stretch of the movie, I guess we kind of talked about, right? There's like he fights with another buck.
I gotta say also in the part we were just talking about, the bunny that Thumper falls in love with is Lola Bunny colored.
Same character.
That's all I have.
Well, that was also the point where I was like, cartoon female animals are so funny, like because they always look like this. Also, there is definitely some kind of goofier animation in this. I guess we talked about that with the owl, but like, right, Flower looking up like gets all rigid. I don't know if that's something.
Oh yeah, that's right. That was it certainly is, but that like the kind of like he turned red in this like thermometer way,
right? Yes,
like that is so cartoony in a way that this movie is not in every other way.
Right, it like never happens before or after that. Yeah, but then there's like the big finale, the big like action set piece of the hunters come back, the attack dogs come out. There's the forest fire. That is all just so incredibly well animated and is like is thrilling.
Scary.
It's scary. Definitely the part of the movie that I remember the least. And yet it ends with, life begins anew. With the following spring, Bambi and what's her name? I just watched this today. This is embarrassing.
Lola Bambi.
No.
Nala.
Nala Bambi.
Mario.
Feline is the female deer that Bambi has children with. So Feline has twins. There's a new generation of deer in the forest. All of the other characters have had children, And we see sort of like almost a passing of the antlers, as it were, from the old great prince of the forest to Bambi, who seemingly now is standing in the same place. He is the new great prince of the forest, as was foretold in the opening scene when they all said, "A prince has been born."
Yeah, like there's a complete mirror of the beginning of the movie in the end of the movie. So there's definitely like a cyclical kind of thing going on here. It's speaking to like the nature of, you know, life's cycles as it like naturally operates in nature. But I thought it was interesting how, you know, you don't necessarily feel bad toward Bambi's dad in the movie, but you're kind of like, all right, kind of sucks that he's like just kind of off doing his own thing and not around, you know, like
Right.
he's this like like you feel distant from Bambi's dad. And you know, I don't 100% know about like the who
deer life cycles and
yeah, like deer familial structures, but if I am to assume that this movie is accurately representing deer familiar structures, I mean, there would be not dissimilar things in other animals, but like I thought it was interesting how, you know, there is a certain distance that the audience feels from Bambi's dad in the movie because of his kind of distance and lack of presence and all that kind of thing. And so like I think in like a typical structure, you would expect Bambi to like break the cycle, you know? You would expect Bambi to be like a little bit
more of an active father in his children's life.
Right. But like he doesn't. And I think that's a really interesting choice where like this movie again is not implying our human understandings of things onto the natural world, right? Like I was watching the YouTuber Big Joel's video essay about Bambi. I didn't actually finish it, but one thing that he said was like this movie is basically like the idea of it is like nature nature operates on its own rhythm in its own cycles, and the only thing that interrupts those cycles is man, right? There is a harmony to the life and death and patterns of the natural world that is only broken by gunfire and campfire. So but it's like so weird to me, like it feels weird because you're watching this movie and you're like, I don't like Bambi's dad, and then Bambi becomes his dad in the end of the movie, and it's not something that it doesn't feel like success, you know. It feels like you don't, once Bambi grows up and becomes the new prince of the forest, you don't see him anymore, you don't see his face anymore, he's just a silhouette in the background,
right?
Like the prince was before. He becomes distant, like he was your point of view, you were Bambi, and then like he is like unmade at the end of the movie as he like graduates to adulthood, like you like he is depersonalized.
Yeah, but it does feel kind of like, I mean, partially just like the physicality of it, he is higher than everyone else. It's like he has ascended to almost like godhood at that point, right? He is the new great prince of the forest. He is the new, you know, Princess Mononoke style keeper of the forest. And that is like that if anything, to me, that I might be getting, you know, maybe too artsy fartsy about this, but like it feels reminiscent of like Greek mythology, where it's like feel like great heroes either die or like ascend to like, you know, become demigods or something, or sort of, you know,
you either live long enough to become a villain,
not Batman, but like they often like sort of ascend to another you know, they go to the Elysian Fields, which is like sort of like heaven, but it's also like a physical place. So it feels a little bit reminiscent of that. I don't know if that's what they were going for, but yeah, it's interesting. I don't have that strong feelings about it. But I agree with you where it almost feels at odds with our what we typically expect from like a Disney animated movie like this, where it's like, oh, we want like the hero to have like a victory, and we want him to have like this feeling of like happily ever after, right? And it's like, he's kind of gone now.
Yeah. His victory is that he has been subsumed back into the natural rhythms of nature.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, but even like with I don't hate the ending. Like it doesn't feel.
I think it's interesting.
Yeah,
It's
like there's something about it that actually I appreciate how much this movie is sort of both reverential and also kind of like deferential, I guess, to nature. Of like no, like this is all working fine the way it is. It's we are the problem here.
Yeah. But it's not even saying that, right? Like there's like so much of Bambi that is not didactic. It is just like depicting. It is just like there isn't some big screed in Bambi about. I mean, like there's a little bit with what his mom tells him, but it's like it isn't going like men have destroyed the forest with their tractors. Like it's not like Fern Gully or something, you know. It's it is just like men are scary to deers,
right?
and like we can bring our own associations and implications from that as in our position as men, as a man on a podcast.
Yeah, same. Man, do better. Stop shooting deer.
One last thing I have to say about this is that this kind of blows my mind. It doesn't feel real, and it's possible that it's not, but I did a quick look and it doesn't seem to be. But that the idea of if you can't say something nice, don't say nothing at all is apparently from this movie. Like when Thumper is repeating the lesson that his dad told him. Yeah, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. Apparently credited to Thumper. That belongs to Thumper.
Thumper, even more of a legend than I already thought he was.
The legend of Thumper.
Yeah. Damn, that's kind of nuts. You said you couldn't find any other, like you couldn't find anything to the contrary. So like
I could not find. I was like, there's no way, and I was like looking for things for the contrary, and I could not really find anything definite.
Well, I mean, I believe it. Another movie that has good writing in it is To Be or Not to Be, directed by Ernst Lubitsch.
Isn't that the question?
Shakespeare invented a lot of turns of phrase, and this movie involves Shakespeare plays, not the guy.
There you go.
Yeah, this is a sort of very contemporary. I wouldn't say ripped from the headlines movie, but it's very like about what is happening in World War II.
Yeah,
which is interesting.
Yeah,
I think it is. I think the only way in which it kind of suffers is maybe in hindsight, in that this is a very silly movie, and 1942 was, as we have previously stated on this episode, the worst year that has ever happened. I think setting a movie about World War II and about like the Nazis in Poland in 1942 now almost feels like it would have been like in bad taste, but I think when it was in production, I think even when it came out, people were like, is this okay to like laugh at? Like, this is very, like, people are literally dying every day. Like, I don't know if this is great, subject material for like a wacky comedy. I do think this movie does a pretty good job of not making light of the fact that Nazis are horrifying while still trying to tell a lighthearted story.
Yeah, I don't think that I don't feel that this movie is distasteful, I'll say.
I don't either, but I also didn't feel that Jojo Rabbit was distasteful, and I know a lot of people did. So your mileage may be.
That one was on the edge for me.
I think Jojo Rabbit goes further than this movie does towards like butting up against bad taste. But yeah, this is about a theater troupe who are fighting the Nazis through the power of showbiz. And by
let's put on a show.
It's so much of a let's put on a show movie, and the fact that it's a let's put on a show movie to like fuck with the Nazis,
yeah,
I think is pretty great. Like the premise of this movie, I was hooked pretty quickly.
This movie feels like it's from the future, like circa 1942, right? Like I haven't really heard of this movie, like relatively speaking,
Yeah, same.
before this. Like, it's not really in the lexicon. I think that like when or not the lexicon, but like the, I don't know, whatever. But like, this is a movie that, you know, everyone was like, oh, the producers was really doing this groundbreaking thing, and it's like,
Oh, of
nope,
like making fun
this
of the
did it first.
Nazis.
Yeah.
Also, like,
Or like,
they did it while the war was still happening, and like while
yeah.
it was still like a very intense thing. Yeah.
And, you know, there's like, you know, the Donald Duck cartoons that are like making fun of Hitler or
Right,
whatever.
I mean,
Like,
we did Great Dictator and the Three Stooges stuff already.
yeah.
You know.
But this is like, yeah, in occupied Poland, and like, yeah, features, you know, marching Nazis. Like, there's like a much more of like a fear in this. It's like, it's not poking fun, but it is having fun, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely portraying Nazis in a sort of buffoonish, at least some of them, in a buffoonish manner, while still acknowledging that even buffoons can be incredibly dangerous, and even the fact that they are buffoons kind of helps make them dangerous, because buffoons are dumb and unpredictable.
Right.
But it is like, yeah, I think this movie doesn't. It feels like it never loses sight of like the danger inherent in every scene. Like, the stakes of this movie are incredibly high.
Yeah.
And you do feel like death hanging over. It's like at any point, like, these people might be shot. And so that is like, but it's also, it is using that to add comedic stakes to it too.
Yeah, it's that kind of tension, like it's using it for comedy in that way of like, when there's a lot of tension and you break the tension, you laugh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it uses that well.
I think there's a lot of like laughter in this movie that's like kind of uncomfortable, like
yeah, very advanced comedy, I will say.
I mean, I do love how much this movie is like feels like a fuck you to Nazis just in general. Like, it feels you can feel the contempt, I guess, for just like, oh, fucking Nazis, I hate them.
Not that I had any doubts about like big Weimar energy Lubitsch,
right,
but like it's nice to see this coming from a German too.
Yeah, I do think going to this knowing that it was like the Ernst Lubitsch like World War II movie kind of, or it's like his, you know, comedy about Nazis. I had high hopes. I was like, let's see what Lubitsch is gonna do, and I was like, all right, yeah, he's bringing it still. I think Ernst Lubitsch is maybe one of, if not the best filmmakers for portraying flirting on screen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if anyone's ever really done it better before or since. Very, very, very good at it. And there's a lot of flirting in this movie, both sort of in a very genuine way and also as like, you know, means to very. There's a lot of like seducing back and forth. There's lots of misunderstandings, lots of hijinks.
Yeah, basically this movie, like, kind of...
It's got a love triangle. We love those.
Yeah, of course it does.
Lubitsch loves those.
This movie is basically like a bunch of actors are about to put on a play. A bunch of actors in Poland are about to put on a play about the Nazis. But right when they're about to do it, the Nazis invade Poland. Everything starts...
First, like, they're censored, I think, and then the invasion happens.
Right.
Because they're like, but like, the government is like, we can't put this on right now because we're worried about
it's too dicey.
Off the Nazis, yeah.
But yeah, then it's a moot point because the Nazis invade, and then everything, they kind of flash forward for a while. They're existing in this like invaded zone where everything sucks. But then all of these people who have all of this acting expertise, all of this romantic tension, and all of these Nazi costumes have found themselves in this kind of unwittingly kind of like involved in this spy plot against the Nazis, which is a great premise.
It very much is. It reminded me a lot of Inglourious Bastards.
Very much so.
In a real sort of like, I'm getting real Boss Baby vibes from this because like obviously this came first.
When you watch Inglourious Bastards, like,
I would be very surprised if Tarantino didn't, and he's probably talked about this also, if this wasn't one of his big kind of points of inspiration for that.
Having watched this movie after Inglourious Bastards, you almost expect it to go in this historical fiction way that
I do kind
that
of wish
Inglourious
it did.
Bastards does. It would have been great, but I wonder if I was thinking like how that would sit in the moment, right? Whether it would feel like this inspirational thing, or like oh yay, we killed Hitler, or like this is how we could do it, or if it was just
With
like
showbiz.
well, we're still. Yeah, it's like we're still kind of in the shit right now, and Hitler isn't dead, so this feels more tasteless, you know?
Right, yeah. Right, it is like Inglourious Bastards is like, you know, defeating the Nazis through the power of cinema, whereas this is like through the power of the stage, of the theater.
Alas, poor Yorick.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. They never do. They never get to alas, poor Yorick in this, do they? They only do the to be or not to be speech.
And that one keeps getting interrupted.
Yeah,
because there's a great recurring gag of the.
I have not seen Hamlet in quite some time. Is that the same monologue? Does it start with alas, poor Yorick and then get to be or not to be? I feel like it does, and I feel very dumb for not knowing this off the top of my head. So yell at me.
I think it's possible. Comments. It's possible.
I'm uncultured. All right, I've only seen Hamlet the one time. All right, I think I read it once, maybe also. Anyway,
I've only seen the Simpsons one.
A lot of spy stuff in this one. There is young baby-faced Robert Stack of Unsolved Mysteries fame as the young Polish pilot who's the sort of one end of the love triangle. There's like the married couple who are actors, and then there's this pilot who has a crush on the God, what's her name? I don't have any names today. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Carol Lombard, Maria Tura.
Right, Carol Lombard, which, I mean, I don't know, we should talk about this right now. This is her last movie because she died in a plane crash in 1942, and it was it was in the news. People were very upset about it. I don't know if I'd seen a lot of other Carol Lombard movies. I think she's very good in this.
Yeah, she's great in this.
I don't think I'd seen a lot of Jack Benny movies either, if any. And yeah, like the cast in this is pretty solid. Like
it's pretty stacked.
Well, true. So yeah, they're the three ends of the love triangle. The title, I guess, is mostly referring to the fact that like the to be or not to be part of the monologue was his sort of like code, his activation code phrase to leave the audience and then go meet up in the dressing room. And that was messing up Jack Benny as Joseph's, you know, he kept seeing this guy leave the audience every time he was doing his big dramatic monologue.
Jack Benny, by the way, another big name that I think we're seeing for the first time here.
Right, yeah. It's like, I feel like there were a lot of kind of big, you know, Hollywood stars, which I was aware, like I never heard the name Jack Benny and Carol Lombard, but wasn't really that familiar with their actual movies. But so there's all this kind of built-in romantic tension that then is sort of layered atop all of this spy tension that then also Carol Lombard's character Maria is then kind of trying to seduce this turncoat professor who's a double agent, and is going to give all of the names of the friends of the Air Force to the Nazis if they let him get this information through to the Gestapo. And so they're all, you know, the whole spy plot is we got to make sure that this guy doesn't get his information to the Nazis, and also we need to kill him because he sucks and he's a double agent. And there's a lot of disguises. They end up killing him too early, so then they have to take his place. And then that becomes a whole thing, and there's like
the gag involved
finding the corpse and shaving the corpse's face.
That's so good. It's so good. It's like really good, like fast thinking. I don't want to ruin it, I feel like, but it's like, yeah, it's such a good gag, like and like such a well thought out, like spy comedy thing of like, how do you, like, you might be discovered as the fake, when they have when they've discovered the corpse of the guy that you're pretending to
be.
be.
There's so much like a literal knife's edge of like people almost being discovered in a disguise or like playing a character, and also just like, you know, things where someone is pretending to be someone else and then the real person shows up and it's like, oh no, what are they gonna do now? And that's like, I think that movie just sustains that kind of gag for almost its entire runtime.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I feel like, right, we almost want to avoid like just like naming a bunch of jokes because it's like, no, go watch the movie. Like, we both know it's funny.
Yeah, watch Lubitsch movies.
Yeah, the writing in this is definitely a real standout, I think. Like, just I mean the twists and turns, but just like a lot of fun dialogue stuff too. And also just like, I mean, I feel like talk about this more maybe in the next movie, but this movie feels, for coming out in 1942, it feels, I think, more kind of daring than it would. I think like having looked at the news and sort of like having a real context of like what was happening in the world in 1942, this movie feels more, just kind of ballsier than I think. Had I watched it cold, I'm like, oh, this is an old movie. Yeah, it was happening during the war, but like, whatever. It just I felt the weight of it, I guess, and the sort of like how much it was very much like, I don't know, not a great comparison because it's also a much better movie than this, but like what's the Seth Rogen North Korea movie, The Interview, that was banned briefly.
Yeah, yeah. I thought you were saying that The Interview was better than this movie.
No. I don't think The Interview is a particularly great movie, but I was also very mad when it, you know, got pulled from a bunch of theaters because it was like, we can't annoy North Korea too much.
It's the only time it's the only time it's ever happened where going to my job made me feel like a hero. Yeah, I showed up.
Yeah, the only time seeing a Seth Rogen movie made me feel like a hero. But so yeah, maybe not a great comparison, but still the sort of thing where it's like there's actual sort of like, I don't know, tension to just this movie existing, I guess. But I think it also just makes me happy.
Like The Great Dictator. The Great Dictator came out 2 years before this movie, and it was so
I think that movie feels, it was like much more daring than this one, even.
Yeah, especially because, like, nobody wanted Chaplin to make it, and he was just like, no, I hate Hitler, I'm gonna make this movie.
Yeah. Also, Chaplin had so much clout that he was just like, I can do whatever I want. I'm like, you can't stop me because I'm Charlie Chaplin.
Yeah.
A bit I really like where they're using a sort of theater spotlight as a like searchlight.
Yeah, that was cool.
It feels like it's sort of drawing a parallel between, like, you know, showbiz and like war, I guess.
Out there on the stage, it's war.
But that's kind of the joke that this movie is into. There was a very funny, I thought, off-screen gunshot towards the end of this movie, where like the head of the Gestapo in Warsaw is like being confronted with the fact that he's gonna like take the fall for all this, you know, goofy bullshit that's happened, and like the characters leave and he's still in the room and we just hear a gunshot off screen, like, oh, I guess he just shot himself. But then he yells again, so it's like, wait, did he? So maybe taking the piss out of that a little bit. But he yells Schultz a lot, which I don't know if Hogan's Heroes stole that from this movie or not, but maybe.
I've never seen Hogan's Heroes.
I've seen
that's another thing has been accused of being tasteless.
I mean, it is pretty wild that was like came out very soon after World War II, and it's like a sitcom. It's so silly.
Yeah,
that I think, like, the few amounts of Hogan's Heroes, I think Hogan's Heroes is kind of a fun show because it is a sitcom, but it does often feel in bad taste because it's like, we're having like a football game or whatever, and it's like, no, that was not happening.
Yeah,
the Nazis were not the mean dean of the school.
Robot House.
Yeah, but this movie I thought was a lot of fun.
Yeah, what was the movie? Let's see. I feel like we watched another movie that had Nazis in it, and then the main characters didn't like the Nazis.
Not a movie that anyone's ever heard of, really, though, I don't think.
No, definitely not Big Daddy material.
Why did we make that what it's called?
Because I made a mistake and you didn't let it go.
Yeah, it's true. It's my fault. I'll take the hit on that one.
Casablanca.
Heard of it?
Forget it, kid. It's Casablanca. That's what they say in this movie.
Barely a 1942 movie. It premiered in December and didn't really go wide until 43, but it is generally considered a 42 movie, even though it won the Oscar.
Run
it won the Oscar for 1943, so whatever. But we're talking about it 42 now today. Casablanca.
Yeah,
pretty famous.
You were like, oh, we need to record right now because I got so much to say about Casablanca. Like, unleash me.
I was talking up Casablanca. Casablanca, spoilers, very good movie. Like,
yeah,
Hachi Machi. What a good movie this
Machi.
is. Directed by Michael Curtiz, who I feel like at this point in his career, I feel like is more of like a swashbuckling guy, right? He's like making Captain Bloods and Robin Hoods and stuff. And this is like a much more kind of serious drama compared to those.
Yeah, I mean, I like this better than his other two movies we've seen.
Me too.
Podcast.
Like, I like this movie more than a lot of other movies because it's Casablanca and it is incredible. Like, hot take there. I mean, I'd seen this before. I think more than once. I mean, for a number of reasons. I think it like really hit for me watching it for the show. I was like, holy shit, Casablanca is an incredible movie.
The vibes that are established in this movie are immaculate.
Yeah. I mean, this is a movie where I'm just like, there isn't really a weak spot in it. I'm just like, yeah, everything comes together so kind of perfectly and magically. And it was also a movie that was kind of thrown together as like, oh yeah, we're making another one of these. Like, you know, it wasn't treated as like, it was treated as like, we're going to try to make a good movie out of this. But it was like, I think there's a lot of stories about how it was at least treated by the studio or the, you know, in production, that it was like kind of churned out a little bit as like, we're going to kind of make a drama about, you know, the contemporary. I think it came out like right after the Allied invasion of North Africa. So they were like, we got to make a North Africa set movie. I don't know if they knew about that while they were making it or if that was just release. I don't know. But it was like a much better and I think much more successful movie than anyone kind of expected it to be. I think similarly to Be or Not to Be, only I think I felt it a lot stronger watching Casablanca, the sort of the context of when it was made and how much it feels like a real kind of I think Casablanca, especially because Casablanca is a much darker movie than To Be or Not to Be, in the sense that it is a drama instead of a comedy, and it is a movie built on so much like the idea of sort of like wild hope, of like having hope in the face of like overwhelming odds and sort of like being surrounded by just so many reasons not to have hope.
It's a movie that, you know,
and I'm like, in 1942 they didn't know what was going to happen.
Yeah. It's you know, it's a little cliche to say that a movie about Nazis reminds us of our times, but like, you know, this is a movie that is about overcoming the disillusionment that you feel in the face of all of the horrors that you feel like you can't make a dent on in the world.
Yeah, it was that exact feeling that like hit me so much watching this, and I like really felt in my bones. Right, there's a line towards the end of the movie. I feel like I don't know how much of the plot we need to get into because it's Casablanca. Everyone knows what happens in Casablanca.
I certainly don't.
Go watch Casablanca.
I mean, I didn't when I watched this.
Had you not seen Casablanca before?
Nope, first time watch.
Oh dang,
seeing it in context, baby.
Nice. And did it live up to the hype?
It's real good. It's a really, I mean, I would agree with you that there is not a weak spot in the movie. I want to watch it again for sure. It was actually
Mm.
playing at a theater like 2 days ago here, and I should have seen it, but I should have watched it, but I didn't.
But so like there's a line towards the end where Victor, the resistance member, says to Rick, Humphrey Bogart's character, like, this time we're gonna beat them, like, we're gonna win. Sort of in the context of this movie makes references to a lot of like historical events that had happened through like the mid to late 1930s, of like part of Rick's backstory, and the reason why he is so cynical throughout most of the movie is that they talk about, oh, when Victor meets him, he's like, I've done my research on you, right? He's like looked up his backstory, and it's like, oh, you ran guns in Ethiopia when Italy was invading, and then you fought in the Spanish Civil War on the loyalist side against the fascists, and both of those were fascist victories, right? Both of them were a fascist country was invading or taking over their own country, and they won. And so Rick has been through those experiences. Now it's sort of like spread to more parts of the world, right? He moved to France. France gets invaded also. That gets, occupied. At the same time, he then like loses and feels betrayed by this woman that he's fallen in love with. And so by the time we see him in the beginning of the movie, when he's in Casablanca running his cafe slash, nightclub,
which, like, that place is so cool. I want to hang
coolest
out.
Place in the world. Yeah. Of course. Rick's Cafe American seems like the coolest place to hang out. I feel like Rick in this movie is kind of like the movie cliche of like a cynical character.
He's really jaded. He doesn't believe in anything. He has no, like,
He's
anytime
incredibly
someone
selfish.
tries to make like an emotional appeal to him, like, he's like, I literally don't give a shit.
Yeah, he's like, I don't give a shit. I care only about myself. Like, that's the only my end goal is only like, how can I just like serve myself in this situation? I have zero empathy for anyone else around me except for maybe Sam, who's my good friend.
You can see that he has principles, and there are ways that I think like his portrayal of himself as an unfeeling guy, like especially throughout the movie, you start to like
you start to see it peel away, right? You see, like, at his heart, he is an idealist who has fought for all of these sort of like idealistic causes, right? And he's lost every single time, right? Every time he tries to fight against fascism or fight for an ideal that he believes in, he loses, right? And then he falls in love with a woman, and she leaves, and he feels betrayed by that, and he's like, I've lost the love of my life. Fuck it. Like, I'm not gonna care about anyone ever again.
Yeah.
And it's like I kind of get it. Like, after all of that, right. I'm like, yeah, he's an asshole. I'm like, you know what? Because also I have been feeling pretty cynical about the state of the world and the state of the United States as a country lately, for no reason in particular. And I feel like this movie's sort of like stance of like, yeah, that is a reasonable way to respond, but it is also kind of, if not cowardly, at least like it's sticking your head in the sand.
Right.
And
that sometimes like the more that you do that, like the more it will arrive on your door eventually.
Yes, that too. And then, right, so slowly we're seeing sort of more and more little moments of Rick sort of like revealing that he is an idealist at heart.
I think one of the like biggest moments is when like seeing through to his character, his true character, is when the cafe is shut down and he is like trying to make sure that he's like gonna burn through all of the money that he has left so that he can continue to pay his staff while it's shut down. And it's like, oh, you're such a goodie, Rick.
Yeah. And he's like, it feels like more and more like he starts to do it more and more throughout the movie, and especially early on, it feels like he's like doing it kind of in a curmudgeonly way. Like, he's begrudgingly been like, all right, fine, I'll like help you out. I'm like, don't ask again, And then like more and more, we're like, oh no, he likes this. Like, he does like helping. But the point that I started this off on is like, there's the line at the end of the movie where Victor tells Rick like, this time we're gonna beat him. And yeah, like, they didn't in 1942. That was an actual like act of optimism There was no guarantee that they would win.
Yeah.
There's a feeling, right? Like, they didn't know in 1942. If anything, there was so much evidence to the contrary at that point. Like, the turning point hadn't really happened yet.
They had to believe in it.
Right. And it's like the fact that this movie is so built on this idea of just like optimism in the face of like overwhelming evil is like, it really got me. And it is schmaltzy. This movie is schmaltzy as hell. It is like the poster for like Hollywood schmaltz, right? And yet I don't feel like it doesn't feel, it feels earned in this movie, I guess. When there's sweeping music, when it's like, you know, when he's saying goodbye at the airport, it is like, it feels very earned. It doesn't feel manipulative. It doesn't feel forced. It's like, no, this is a real moment between characters that have layers, that are making decisions that don't feel easy for either of them.
Yeah. It's so earned, I don't even think of it as schmaltz. It's like, you know,
right? Yeah,
I think schmaltz is like, it has no substance. This is just feeling. It's just genuine, like genuine sentiment, not sentimentality.
Sentiment is probably a better word, because schmaltz, I think, does have a real negative connotation. I think sentiment is something that some people, I think, view kind of negatively, especially in movies. That I mean, you know, I love Spielberg. I love Casablanca. I like sentiment in my movies, clearly. Another like famous scene in this movie that I think like hit me a bit harder than I expected to is like the scene where Victor gets the band to play was the French national anthem, right?
Yeah, which felt very like the Grand Illusion, like this.
I mean, it felt almost like they were like maybe doing a little
like riffing on that.
Yeah, because it is very similar and it's the same piece of music. But yeah, I don't know, just the idea, right, that it isn't like, I don't know, I was very just caught up in this idea that like when this movie came out, it was not like, oh yeah, World War II, we got this beat, you know, we got this handled. It's like maybe that was the prevailing idea in the United States, because that's like what people needed to hear in order to like get behind the war effort. But like they didn't know.
Yeah.
But also, like, we haven't even mentioned like the incredible dynamite supporting cast of this movie. I think the romantic story works really well. It's like simultaneously incredibly, it's like it does a thing that I think is very impressive, that it gets you to a point where you want desperately to see the two characters end up together, and then it makes them not ending up together feel like a happy ending.
Yeah.
And I'm like, God damn it, movie, that was good. You know,
like, okay, you thought he died, and then you found out that he didn't die.
Yeah,
like,
it has like
it.
Claude Rains plays such a huge piece of shit in this movie, and yet at the end of the movie, you're like, hell yeah, dude, this guy rules.
It's like, we got him. I mean, even that's the thing, right? It's like not just I was gonna call him Sam Spade. Like that
might as well be.
It's not just his cynicism that's defeated. It's the guy whose cynicism is so strong that he becomes a Nazi collaborator. Like, he's the one who is defeated also.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like he does horrible things in that movie, but it almost feels like he redeems himself in that one moment. Such a like nice Hollywood movie moment where you're just like, he did it.
Which I also, big credit to Claude Rains for like getting that character to work that way, because I don't think a lot of other actors could have pulled off that as well. I mean, this is probably the thing Claude Rains is best known for. Like, Invisible Man is probably pretty close, but I feel like in terms of his entire filmography, it's like, I mean, pretty much anyone who's in this movie, this is their most famous movie. I don't know if that's really, I think this is their most famous movie, maybe not their most famous role. Like Conrad Veidt, who plays the Nazi general or whatever, his most famous role is probably the somnambulist from Caligari. Yeah. Also, just cool to see him show up. I think this was his last movie also.
His last movie, really?
If I'm remembering correctly. Yeah.
Yeah. Last film role to be released in his lifetime.
Yeah. I mean, he's very good in this, playing a like very classical like Nazi villain guy who's just, very I don't know, sort of aristocratic and mean to everyone he meets.
Mm-hmm. Well, if we're talking about supporting characters too, Glenn's MVP, I feel like is always going to be Peter Lorre.
Also, again, like maybe not Peter Lorre's like most famous role, but like this is also like as quintessential Peter Lorre as you're likely to get.
Yeah,
Is this Ugarte, and where he's just like he's a real kind of like slippery character. He's sort of like he's definitely a criminal, but you're not even sure entirely what kind of criminal he is. He's just the kind of guy that is always, he's got some shady deal going on somewhere.
Yeah.
And he isn't even in the movie very much. I actually was kind of surprised how quickly he's taken away.
Take him away, Sam.
Yeah. that famous line that isn't in the movie.
Yeah, because it's played against
him, not in the movie.
Yes.
People often say play it, or play the song, or play as time goes by, or hey Sam, how are you? But like no one says,
"What are you doing playing that song, Sam?"
Yeah.
I told you not to play that song.
Sam, I told you not to play that song. Also, right, just like that piece of music as like the thing that is like representative of their like past failed romance works so well.
It's like such a good thing because it's like couples will get a song that's like their song, right?
Yeah.
And it captures this melancholic feeling of hearing your couple's song after the fact, right?
Yes.
Like it's why he banned it from the bar. He's like, I can't deal with it. Like I think that,
but then also once he hears it again, he meets her again for the first time in years, he's like, play that song on loop, like while I drink a whole bottle.
Yeah, because it makes him so sad, right? It's like he doesn't want to confront his feelings. He's gruff. He is detached. He doesn't want to confront his feelings. But like, he's also like maybe part of the reason why he doesn't want to confront his feelings is because of his tendency toward negativity. And so once he gets the opportunity to listen to that song, he just hurts himself over and over by listening to it.
It's a good movie.
I think that like we talked about like the ways that his kind of the ways that he's putting on a show of being detached and everything are like broken down by us seeing that he's actually a good and nice guy. Like the one of the most like impactful individual moments of that is just like when he is confronted with his lost love, right? He crumbles.
Yeah, immediately. He is a mess.
Like he has such a polished exterior that is just gone.
Yeah. Right. They have like that first meeting scene where they're in the cafe and Victor's there, but then like there's the later scene where she comes back, which also like that reveal. The lighting in this movie, impeccable. Holy shit. This movie looks so good. There's the bit right where he's sitting in the bar at his bar in the dark after hours. And the door opens and she's like backlit in the doorway. And it's like, oh, she's back. And they have just this is their first like real honest conversation that they've had. And he is just like spewing venom at her. He is just like so angry. And so he can't let go of this feeling of betrayal that he had that she kind of left him in the night with leaving a sort of very vague cryptic note saying like, sorry, I love you, bye, you'll never talk to me again, and I can't say why.
Yeah.
And so he, again, rightfully, I'm like, yeah, I'd be maybe a little peeved also.
You mentioned the lighting, and like one kind of quick note is that there's a disco ball in this movie. I don't know about the history of disco balls, but like I was like, okay, they existed in the early 40s then.
Maybe this movie invented the disco ball. I don't think it did. Ingrid Bergman, also, I think the first thing we watched for the show with her.
Yeah, another big name.
Right in this movie. I'd seen this before. I'd seen other Ingrid Bergman things. I am definitely kind of reminded of Isabella Rossellini, particularly the voice. I can kind of hear the lineage there. But I think like talking about like Humphrey Bogart and or not Isabella Rossellini, talking about Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman in this movie is a bit like, what are we gonna say that hasn't been said already? Like, they're very good. They're very good.
Right.
They're heartbreaking. You know, all of that. But yeah, this movie gets, I think, the feeling of like romantic melancholy really well. This
Mhm.
feeling of like ache and like hurt, but also like there's still an undeniable kind of like attraction there, where they're just like, like, damn it, like I have all this pain layered atop all of my like romantic feelings, and just kind of trying to like sift through all of those.
Yeah. Not knowing how to deal with these feelings, because it's just like so many conflicting things going on at once.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I think this movie does a really good job of sort of like putting that up on screen without, I don't know, without it feeling, kind of dishonest or overly like dramatized. Like it
Mhm.
feels pretty. I mean, the acting styles are maybe a little exaggerated because it's the 40s, but it feels as real as any, I don't know, as any emotion that I've really seen on screen at this point. Who else is in this movie? Sidney Greenstreet. He's in there.
Straight off a Maltese Falcon.
Yeah, a
Uh
lot of Maltese Falcon sort of alums in this movie. A big point of reference, I think, probably the first way that we were both maybe introduced to this movie was through one of its big cultural influences, which is Grim Fandango,
yeah.
the
Yeah.
LucasArts adventure game from the late 90s, which is
What do we got in Grim Fandango?
also a masterpiece.
A masterpiece. We got
Yeah.
the suit. We got the gambling announcer guy.
Yeah.
We got we got like some of the same
The
window
corrupt
shades.
chief of police. We have playing the piano. We have reconnecting with a lost love after a long time. We have owning a big nightclub in a sort of transient, sort of limbo-esque
Liminal
location where people are traveling to somewhere else, and it is very difficult for them to get somewhere else. Grim Fandango has, I mean, a whole large chunk of Grim Fandango is just Casablanca. Like almost verbatim, and it doesn't try to hide that at all. As a fellow Grim Fandango appreciator, I feel like it's worth mentioning and talking about how much that game was probably my first actual like exposure to Casablanca.
Yeah. And you brought me Grim Fandango. My Grim Fandango discs are burned from your Grim Fandango discs.
Wow. From the original.
Burned from the original.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how much I have to say about it, but like, you bring up an interesting thing in that reference to Grim Fandango that I was thinking about with this, is that like Casablanca, it's liminal, baby. Like it is like I feel like liminal is one of those words that you can just throw out to sound smart, but like I don't know how much I have to say about the liminality of Casablanca. I mean, he is in I guess like a liminal space in between in his emotions, right? Like he is
this movie is
Casablanca,
about like the idea of a liminal space almost.
Right. It's like all of these people who are not able to flee. They're not trying to flee to Casablanca. They're fleeing from their countries through Casablanca to get to where they're trying to go, like America or something like that. And so like he is stuck in a transitionary space, I guess. And then he is also stuck like in his emotions, right? He hasn't gotten over something.
Yeah. But also, like his emotions, he's sort of made peace with his transitionary state, right? He's sort of like, he's comfortable in Casablanca. He owns a nightclub. He's sort of got a tuxedo. He's like running things, right? Everyone respects him more or less.
Like Manny Calavera.
Yeah, exactly. But it's funny. I don't know if I'd made that direct of connection between those. Like his physical circumstances are very representative of his emotional state. Yet another thing that makes this a good movie. Talk about the famous ending a bit, where it's like he sends Victor and Elsa off to be together because they're married, And because under the Hays Code rules, they can't actually end up together because she's still married. Like, that is kind of a funny thing about this movie is you're like, oh, what's going to happen? And it's like, that according to the Hays Code, they can't end up together unless Victor is killed.
Which does happen sometimes.
Sure, yeah. I read that originally the movie ended where, right, he sends them off on the plane and then Rick is arrested. It had more of a sort of like downbeat ending,
no.
where it was like even more of a sacrificial thing. I'm glad that they soften it and that they just shoot the Nazi general and they're like, all right, someone did it. Who knows? Go arrest somebody.
Yeah, I think that like that's interesting because it's like, you know, like we were talking about with this movie being inspirational, right? Like we're gonna win. We gotta keep fighting. Like
it somehow makes corruption like a cheer moment.
Yeah. But like I think that this movie doesn't feel propagandistic, and it doesn't feel like shallow, but like that inspirational aspect of it, I don't think would work quite so well if it was more, because I think Rick getting arrested is more of like a ironic ending. I sacrificed myself, and it's like the end of a story. But like I feel like with him teaming up with the corrupt cop so that they could take down more Nazis, it's like hell yeah. like
yes, it ends on a hell yeah moment, which is crazy for a movie that had just previously been like, oh, so tragic.
Yeah.
Like this movie, I think this movie ends up feeling both very, like, it feels very tragic and yet it also feels very comforting and kind of triumphant. Which again is a thing where I'm just like, damn, like how did they pull that off? And then a lot of dialogue in this movie is very famous. Probably most notably the line that isn't in the movie, which we already talked about, but round up the usual suspects is a famous line from this movie. I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship is a famous line. There's a bunch more.
Here's looking at you, kid. Is
that one,
which I don't understand what that means, honestly. Like
it's kind of it's like a toast. It's like, hey, here's two looking at you. Kind of, yeah.
It's just, but it's weird. But then
it becomes a sort of shorthand that he says to her, at least.
He says it when he looks at her and likes her, but like,
yes, he's describing what he's doing.
Yeah, it's like, I'm like, is he saying I'm looking at you? Like, I don't.
I'm looking at you, kid.
I don't.
It wouldn't have the same ring to it.
I don't understand what that line means. Like, I feel like it's supposed to be this really like impactful line, and I get that. I get part of the feeling of it with the relationship, but I'm just like, I was so bogged down by like, what does that mean? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I wish I could describe it better. I feel like it's one of those things that just it's how it feels, you know? A line in this movie that I guess is kind of famous that I love is when Captain Renault, Claude Rains, he's told by the Nazis, like, you have to shut down the Rick's Cafe. And he's like, all right, fine. And so then he's like, you're all under arrest. I've just learned that there's been gambling happening. I'm shocked to learn that there's gambling happening here. And then someone comes up to him and goes, here are your winnings. And he goes, oh, thank you. And shoves them in his pocket.
It's good. It's very good.
That one exchange like sums up that entire character almost. That he's like, you know, oh dear, gambling? You're all under arrest. Oh, yeah, thank you for my winnings from all the gambling I've been doing.
Claude Rains is so good at playing different types of scoundrels. Like
he's so scummy in this movie, and yet he somehow remains likable.
Yeah.
Also, there's this isn't even a particularly famous line, but one that I thought was very fun is when Rick is talking to the head Nazi guy, and he's sort of like, but what would you think if we were to invade America? And he's like, well, there are certain sections of New York that I wouldn't advise you to invade. And I'm like, this is a pretty good line.
That's a good line, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, ooh, what sections of New York is he talking about?
What are the dangerous sections, or at least the ones with like a bunch of people, a bunch of Spider-Man extras who
Brooklyn, baby.
You mess with one of us, you mess with all of us.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
Say that to the Nazis.
I was inspired by that bit in Spider-Man and Casablanca. Yeah, I guess we've covered the big stuff. Right. Some classic Michael Curtiz shadow work in this movie of like silhouettes and sort of stuff projected on walls. Yeah, good movie, Casablanca. You know what? I'm gonna I'm gonna go out there and be dangerous and say that Casablanca, good movie.
It's been a while, I guess, since we've been able to call a classic an unambiguously bad movie, right? Maybe Birth of a Nation or Intolerance or something. Even Intolerance, there's maybe debatability, but it's like it is nice to watch these classic movies and go like, ah, yes, this is why it's a classic. This is why everyone loves it. I've been totally TCM pilled.
Yeah.
Like
I think this
I'm
more
loving it.
than most other like, you know, classics. This one is I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Like this one deserves to be one of the most famous movies ever because it's incredible. It's great.
Here's looking
Great.
at
Like
you, kid.
also oh, damn it, that should be the end. I had another thing to say, but I ruined it.
Uh-oh.
Very very quickly, one last bit is just that I went to the Academy Museum in LA and they had a bunch of stuff from this movie. They had the piano that Sam is playing, and they pointed out in that exhibit how much it is like this is a very international movie of like a lot of the cast and crew are from all over the world, and that is a cool thing to see. Um, in any movie, but especially like a movie like this that is about sort of this right limbo city, and it's like such a melting pot, and there's just like, but it's not just like we cast a bunch of British actors to do accents. It's like everyone actually is kind of like from different places in the world, which is cool.
Yeah. Quite an international movie, like Rush Hour 2.
Yeah, exactly the movie I would compare to Casablanca.
Rush Hour 2 is kind of my barometer for any movie.
Rush Hour 2, but not Rush Hour 1. Rush Hour 2.
I like them both. I think Wayne's World 1 and Wayne's World 2 are kind of like in the same kind of situation as Rush Hour 1 and Rush Hour 2, where it feels like they're...
Rush Hour 2 is a funnier like name drop. Like it's a funnier movie to cite. Yeah.
No, that is precisely why I said Rush Hour 2 instead of Rush Hour. But yeah, they're both of more or less equal quality. But anyway, Casablanca, good movie.
So, Chris, what was your favorite movie of 1942?
My favorite movie of 1942, it was probably Casablanca. I have a lot of love for Bambi. I have a lot of love for To Be or Not to Be. But Casablanca is just a very, very fine film. It is you gotta respect it. You gotta hand it to it.
Yeah, I mean, same here. Like it was also my favorite movie of 1942. Big surprise there. Casablanca, good movie. I think going into it, I was like coming in real hot for Cat People because I had seen it before, and I was like, Cat People, good movie. But then I watched Bambi, and I was like, holy shit, Bambi might be my favorite. And then I watched Casablanca, and I was like, never mind, Casablanca all the way.
Oh, you went through a journey. Yeah,
I had lots of ups and downs, but like it's Casablanca, man. It's like synonymous with like classical Hollywood movies, you know? If you're gonna pick something to be like, this is movies, I feel like it's usually Casablanca.
Can't argue with that. Bambi, very good, very interesting, very innovative. To Be or Not to Be, very fun, very funny.
Yeah, also very good.
Cat People, very innovative. The classic line, forget it, kid, it's Casablanca.
Wait, forget it, kid. Like, it's also Chinatown?
What?
Because forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown is the Chinatown line.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. I forgot about Jake.
There's so many iconic lines in Casablanca that you're now just adding more in it, you know. That classic line, Ilsa, I am your father. That classic line, we're going to need a bigger cafe.
Well, that's it. Thank you for listening to another long episode of 1 Week, 1 Year. What do you? Whoa, you're toasting. Oh wait,
I was gonna say here's
we keep botching this.
I'm looking at you, kid. It was originally that in the script.
It was I See You, Jake Sully.
Yes. And Waterfall.
1 week, 1 year. Thanks for listening.
Yeah.
Subscribe and stuff. I hope you liked our discussions of sexy skunks and manic pixie witches and Nazis. And if that doesn't sum up what our podcast is, I guess nothing else does. All right. That'll do it. Here's looking at you, Glenn. I'll see you next year.
See you next year.
There is, in some cases, a psychic need to loose evil upon the world. And we all of us carry within us a desire for death.